All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Doof Game Club, Doof Media's exploration of the joy of play. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
I'm Elliot Diebold.
And I'm Alexandra.
Yes,
I
we're
guess.
yes, we
Not
are
a
joined
not
by
normal.
a very special guest. You may know her from Do the Right Thing. You may know her from just all the great stuff on the Doof Media Network that she does. Alexandra, welcome.
Thank you. And I'm an
Um,
RPG expert. And by that I mean I played a couple of them. I still haven't played Baldur's Gate, so I'm not actually an expert, but I'm
yeah,
a
I mean, going into
Relative,
this game. Sorry, what were you going to say,
I was
Elliot?
just relatively, at least compared to
Yeah.
me, massive expert. Yeah,
Going into this game, Elliot and I both knew that there were going to be a lot of words in this game, and obviously we're not word experts, so we thought we'd bring in someone who was a word expert.
thanks. Yeah, practice on a million word Wildbow story will do that, but you wouldn't know about that at all.
no,
So
No,
ours,
no.
ours wasn't quite a million.
Yeah.
well,
Um,
I feel like with the doubling up maybe, but
Fair. Um, but yeah, so we just before we get started, actually, there's audio desync.
just before we get started, a quick reminder that the Doof Discord is public. Woo! So you can head in there if you want to participate more during the game club, outside of these monthly streams. We obviously do actual streams and constant discussion about the games. I would say a main part of the game club is us interacting with the community as we all kind of play these games together. Um, Also worth noting that we're kind of thinking about the game club format and we're talking to the community about what they like about the game club. So if you want to have your say, it's free to join the Discord.
Yeah, we
Doof.com/Discord.
yeah we're planning some like pretty substantial changes to the way it all works, and we're mostly coordinating that through the game club, so through the Discord, because one of the big points
Yeah,
is going to be
yeah.
this stream at the end of the month is just kind of the like optional cherry on top of what Game Club's meant to be. Like the main action happens there on the Discord. So, yeah, go check it out if you're not already there.
And with that, shall we start talking about Disco Elysium?
Yeah, let's do it.
no.
No,
Just
and
yeah,
that's the end
let's
of the
go.
stream.
Cool. Thanks
Hey,
for
it's
coming.
just like the game. You could choose whatever option, and there's
Yeah, exactly.
consequences.
So now everybody in chat, press 1 if you want to hear us talk about Disco Elysium, or press 2 if you want to hear us, I don't know, try and shoot a child.
Yeah, I guess should we run through how our playthroughs went, and if people in the chat want to give us like highlights of their runs or how the first run they did or whatever went for them, please do.
Yeah. Do you want to start off with non-spoilers, just so that people who just tuned in and don't know what Disco Elysium is might actually get a hint? But
Well,
Yeah, we're
yeah, okay.
probably not going to get to spoilers until around, I don't know, slide 8-ish, I would guess.
Yeah.
I feel like we might dip
no.
into it a little bit, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
true. It's hard to. I guess it's worth saying, like, one, we all really enjoyed this game, but two, like, a lot of what makes this game really special is the writing and the narrative of the game, which obviously we're going to be talking about, but it's like, and we'll probably touch on some of the mechanical stuff as well, but we are going to have to jump into talking about the narrative and the characters and the way the story unfolds, because that really is what the game is, right? So, I think I can speak for all of us when we say we all really enjoyed this game.
Yep.
So
Oh,
if
yeah.
you haven't played it, go and play it.
I'd also say
we'll
go-
get into spoilers from next slide. So I guess for this slide,
Yeah.
it's super high picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, as Ruben sort of touched on, I think going in, this was not a game I expected to enjoy. This is not the sort of game I like. So I was very pleasantly surprised that I very, very much liked this game. Like a bit of a selfish motivation on my end when we started the game club was I wanted to like expand the types of games that I play, and those of you who follow us know that sometimes that has been a mixed success. It absolutely wasn't with Disco Elysium. This is a game I never would have given a chance before, but I absolutely fell in love with it. That took a while though. I'd say the first 5 hours.
Yeah, that's a long time to
Yeah.
be having a rough time with it, but
I was just a bit antsy. Like I kept wanting to go out and do things and stop talking to people, and it took about 5 hours for the game to like break me in and teach me that was the game.
Mhm.
Yeah, I had some experiences like that as well, where you kind of you know, when I was playing the game for my first 1 or 2 sessions, I couldn't play it for any longer than about 45 minutes to an hour without starting to feel like, okay, I've just been reading things on the screen for ages. But then once, you know, maybe about 2 or 3 hours in, it really, really hooked me in. And I mean, I had sessions over 2 or 3 hours. I know you that doesn't hold a candle to your gargantuan 6 or 7 hour sessions that you had, Elliot, but it was pretty, you know, pretty gripping.
Yeah, I was the same. I had to really, really push myself to do a 2-hour session for my first one.
Mm.
And then yeah, I accidentally did a 7-hour one towards the end. So like that's sort
Well,
of
I
the
mean,
testament I'd give it right there.
considering how much words this story has, it does make sense that the beginning, especially, it's rough of just like shaking you into it and be like, hey, yeah, you're reading a whole like book series in a video game.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, yeah. Um, yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. I played a lot of these sort of RPGs. I actually completely forgot what ones I would have said right now, but you know, story based and lacking in like most RPGs, right, are split into like a combat section and then this sort of thing. But this one is just the role playing aspect, which is I think is an interesting twist on that sort of genre.
I like it. I mean, my feeling on tabletop stuff is 100%. I don't like combat in tabletop RPGs.
Mm-hmm.
And that does extend a fair bit to like JRPG combat stuff. So just getting to focus on the roleplay part, I think, is more interesting.
Yeah, fair
Yes, I agree. Yeah, Kirk McDonald in the comments says there's a comparison to Planescape Torment, but it voids Torment's major weakness by not having combat as a mechanic. I haven't played Planescape, but I know of it, and I think like this game plays with the expectations of the genres and plays them in different ways that are really interesting. And if we want to get a bit more like broader with like RPGs as a history, it's pretty interesting because like RPGs, they really, the tabletop RPGs really became like, they started with wargaming, with like Civil War wargaming and Warhammer, and Dungeons and Dragons was originally like very combat focused, but also terrible. And it's interesting as we're like, that influenced how we think of role-playing games as video games. So all of like Baldur's Gate and all of those are all combat focused as well.
Mm.
But this is sort of following that trend in tabletop RPGs in real life, where yeah, it's focusing a lot more on the role-playing aspect over anything else. I mean, there's like combat in this, but it's one little thing
Yeah,
basically.
combat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I kind of think it's worth making a comparison to like a point and click game almost,
Mhm.
which is kind of what this feels like, except obviously this is a very, very refined version of that. And I think the main thing that makes this feel so much better is just the sheer amount of agency you have and the ability to solve things in different ways, which is something that I feel in a lot of these kinds of games that I've played, like, you know, if it's like a visual novel or like a point and click game or something, there's always you have to do this thing. You have to figure it out in this specific way. Whereas something that I thought was a real strength of Disco Elysium is it really does, more than any other game I've played, let you solve things the way that you want to solve them. Even though you're only choosing from a predefined set of options, I never really felt like I didn't have oh, this is how I would tackle it, you know?
Yeah. Walbo in the chat has mentioned that the Telltale games are especially bad for
Yes.
fulfilling that need, and like that's the example I'd point to with like point and clicks.
Yeah. Or again, I mean, another point that I kind of want to make that's, I guess, spoiler free, so I'll put it in here, is like, um, when I think about what is the best game that I've seen as a representation of games as a kind of artistic or narrative focused form, previous things that might be listed amongst that are things like these Telltale games. But looking at the Telltale games, they're effectively like a movie that has some light QuickTime events in it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas this is actively I am Harry Dubois telling the story of what it would be like if I was this character in this world, right? And it's so
100%.
much richer and deeper and more engaging, I guess. It's just like, to me, Disco Elysium has taken the spot as the pinnacle of games as a narrative expression form.
Yeah, well, because like the thing that games let you do with a narrative is add the interactive layer, and this is absolutely the pinnacle of that, as far as I've seen. Of like taking the concept of narrative and user interaction and actually blending those two together so effectively.
Mm. Yeah, or even like, you know, this is a game that is telling a story that has a lot of, I mean, it has one, a deep story, but then also two, like explorations of political themes, really, is the core of what it's exploring, right? And it does so in a way that really lets you choose how you're engaging with those themes on a level that is so much deeper than anything
Yeah.
else I've really seen, at least narratively. I mean, like, I can think of other games that I think are really strong art forms. Like, I'm thinking of like fucking Florence that we did for the Game Club, or Outer Wilds, and those are
Yeah.
both also very artistically strong games, but not, I would say, as narratively strong.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Like to touch on what you like just before we head into spoilers, and because we'll talk a lot more about all this stuff. The last thing I want to say before we go into spoilers is you mentioned Outer Wilds, and I want to say for me this hit a lot of the same like good vibes that Outer Wilds did in that sense. Like I love these games where you feel like an explorer or a detective, quite literally in this case. Like with Outer Wilds, the highlight for me was like feeling like I was exploring that solar system. And the reason Outer Wilds fell flat was because there was no life in the solar system. Like the
Mm,
NPCs in that game were just like cardboard cutouts. Um,
mm,
this game really gets a lot closer to like what I love about my favorite game of all time, Majora's Mask, in that it felt like I was getting to know the people, their story, helping them, like learning about them. Um, yeah, it's kind of like if you put Outer Wilds and Disco Elysium together, they'd form like the ultimate vision I'd have for like a Majora's Mask sort of sequel.
Yeah, let's get Zaum to make the next Zelda game.
Yeah.
mm. Okay, before we go on, I have a few other things I want to touch on. I know we were going to say we're going to move on to
Okay.
spoilers, but I want to touch on some other stuff that people are bringing up in chat because I think they're interesting points. So Mrs.
Mhm.
Evil Doom is bringing up the point of like, it's not necessarily big choices, but these are micro choices that inform your character. And I think that's true. I mean, there are some
Yeah.
small choices that have big implications, I guess I would say, but also just like it, this game doesn't need to let you actively change the direction the plot goes in, right? I mean, you kind of do in some ways, but it's not like you, oh, suddenly you go off to a completely different area and do something completely different. What the game does let you do is it's so densely and well written that it's, you think that you're choosing the path just by coincidence that leads to the exact point the game wants you to. It's like masterfully built in the way that you have agency while also doing exactly what the game wants you to
Yeah.
do. And
I'm
it
going to
never
jump
feels
ahead
like there's a,
because I had a
yeah.
bunch of notes on exactly this, so I'm just trying to find them.
It's like different people taking the same path, but every single time you play, it is a different person.
Yeah, and it feels like it's their path as well. The game perfectly, has that happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll touch on that more later for sure, as well.
I think the only like anchor to all of the various characters you make is that you are a detective and you're solving this thing, and that's basically it. And so
Yeah.
long as you are trying to solve the thing, you're gonna
Yeah, that's what
end
you
up
really
wandering
need
and
to
yeah.
buy into is like I will stay to solve this case. That's pretty much the only
Mm.
thing you're locked into doing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, so I guess we should talk about our own individual playthroughs.
spoilers from here on out,
Yes.
I guess.
Yeah.
So on the left is Ruben's stats at the end of the game. On the right are mine. Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny, like, and I think this really shows the breadth that we're talking about and what you can get out of a playthrough. I think we actually started from fairly similar foundations, Ruben, of like characters much more focused towards like intellect slash psyche,
Hmm.
and then just completely went in opposite directions from there, apart from the communist thing.
I think all of the people in the Discord kind of naturally went that way. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't,
it's a
unless
pretty
you're
common experience,
actively
I think.
choosing. I don't know how, and I mean, let's just bite the bullet. This stream is sometimes going to get political because we're talking about fucking Disco Elysium, so
Yeah,
it has to
yeah.
happen. It was crazy to me how you could go in a direction that is like, unless you're explicitly choosing to play a fascist character.
Yeah.
This game is clearly such an anti-fascist game.
Well, yeah, you sort of play everything at the same time even. What I like is that all of those perspectives are made fun of, and it's like done in a nuanced way, and it's like, I mean, it's clear like where it wants your conclusions to go, but like it doesn't do an obviously like entirely, like it does pros and cons of every side, I guess. I don't know if there's really any pros to fascism in this game, but I mean, like when it talks about communism, it's like, yeah, that's the goal of this revolution in the past was overall good, and we don't know if it was actually bad. They just like failed because other people came in. But
yeah, it's the classic. Nobody's
modern,
ever actually done communism correctly.
But yeah, and it makes fun of that notion, and like the modern communists that really just sit around reading books and stuff, and yeah, I just think it's a very nuanced perspective that it takes. Like every single dialogue option for all of them is just ridiculous, except for moralism, which is also ridiculous in its own way. So
yeah, I guess I do like that Harry is a character who is inherently ridiculous. So whichever political ideology you side with, you're going to make it seem a bit ridiculous by association.
Yeah, which is I think that is the one reason I could see myself deciding to, like, if I was going to do another run, sit down and be like, okay, I can do like a fascist run, just because I will be kind of taking the piss out of myself as I'm doing it, I guess. Like, and I don't know.
Hey, you
first
both
runs.
internalized racism, so
I mean,
I tried not to.
Yeah, I tried not to as well. I had to, and then I forgot it immediately as soon as I could.
Yeah. I really like Miss Evil Doom's comment, which is that the fascists and the ultralibs are made fun of for their ideals, whereas the moralists and the communists are made fun of for failing to live up to their ideals.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I like that nuance. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely found I kept trying to role play as this superstar communist cop, and you can sort of see from my stats I did fairly well. But obviously there were also a bunch of times where like I didn't, and like that was something I feel like I was inconsistent at role playing in this first playthrough. Like if I was going to do a second one, I would really like to commit to doing something, and maybe like fascist would work because I'd like to think that that's the opposite of what I actually am. So it's like easier to sort of enter role playing like space in my head.
In my second run, I took a lot of the fascist options, and it's really interesting that even if you are committed to it, like sometimes you can tell that you don't have to say the most terrible thing on there, and so you just don't, because you don't want to see the characters' reactions. But that's disappointing.
That was definitely
a failure of your role playing, Alex, because if you were a fascist, like that's you trying to shy away from fascism.
Yeah. Well, though I do want to when we talk later more in depth about these sort of mechanics, there's the way that it fascism is done mechanically, because all the thoughts have their own twist on it, is really interesting. So I'd like to get into that later.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, no, I kind of agree, Alex. I found it hard to commit to, like, sometimes doing what I felt was like the superstar cop move or something. It was just going to clearly hurt the person I was talking to. And sometimes I'd be like, oh, I can't do it. Like, if I really liked that character. Whereas, if it was like Plaisance or something, I was like, fuck you, I'm going to do the superstar cop move.
Yeah, who cares about Plaisance?
Yeah, exactly. So, like I definitely, like, sometimes the Elliot came through in the role playing, and sometimes I went more into the wacky Harrier I was going for. Yeah, so I don't know. I just find role playing hard, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I think no matter what, you're going to be tinged by your own self, even if you are playing like against yourself, it still
Yeah.
is yourself. I ended up trying to commit to like a wise madman sort of role. I don't know how much I succeeded on the wise part, but the madman part was fun. Um, one thing I did want to ask, and I have this a little bit later, but like, how much did your hesitance to take certain choices change over time? Because I think for myself, like I like try to commit to doing that wise madman thing, and I did definitely have a lot of hesitance at the beginning, but it was like a choice I was making, and so I pushed past that. But later on, I sort of, I guess, in my head, the character just serioused up as the situations got more serious. I stopped saying as many of the most ridiculous things,
Yeah.
or at least like said the ridiculous things, but in like a way that it feels right.
Yeah.
I don't know.
At least for me, I felt like I was pretty consistently inconsistent, if that makes sense. Like I think the amount of time I wussed out of doing the ridiculous thing was probably fairly consistent. Um, it's
I
yeah,
definitely started out picking wacky choices, but then by the time I started to really engage, it became me playing the game, right? And I want to go to the next slide because I just want to pull this out because I think this is an interesting thing to touch on. These kinds of choices. So this is from Elliot's playthrough, a moment that I thought just really captured the way Elliot plays the game, where
probably how I play
as soon
most video games, to be honest.
if the game tells you, "Oh, don't do something," I'm sure, Elliot, in your head you think, "Well, what happens if I do though?"
Yep.
So I think it's just interesting to think about and to like examine how much, because as I played the game more and more and fell in love with it more and more, I really felt like I can't make choices that are going to put these characters in actually poor situations. Like I felt like I had an obligation to legitimize myself as a cop, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas no, I think you're right. I think like my driving force for like a lot of interactions was like looking at the list and being like, which of these is probably gonna have the funniest outcome, or like I'd read one, I'd be like, oh my god, what is that gonna do? Like,
which is very superstar cop of you, I think.
yeah, I'd like to think so. But I definitely was inconsistent with it. Like, yeah, sometimes, if I if I thought it was really gonna hurt Kim or something, like I wouldn't do it. But there were definitely like, at the time I accidentally put the gun in my mouth and pulled the trigger because I thought the game would stop me.
That
And so
is a wild, yeah. I love that
once you put the gun
sequence.
in your mouth, and then it was like pull the trigger, and I was like, oh, it's not going to do that. It's like clicked, and then it did, and I died, and I was like, well, I don't know what I expected.
You have to watch that one, Ruben. It's so high stakes and it's so stressful. Like everyone's yelling at you not to do it.
Yeah, everyone freaks
and then
the
you do
hell
it
out.
anyway.
I do like, I mean, similar to, a role-playing campaign, I guess, this game lets you make terrible, stupid choices.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Like, because I mean, that's really the big thing with this entire game is it's essentially just it feels like a pre-written tabletop RPG campaign. Like, and obviously, like that metaphor is very sort of on the front because you're rolling dice all the time. But it like just that way I was allowed to explore the parts of the world and the characters that I wanted to. Like 90% of the time, it felt like I had control over what options I had. It honestly feels to me like you write something like this by basically coming up with the core campaign and having like 100 people play a tabletop campaign and then just keep all of the
And
different directions
keep
they
adding
want.
choices.
Yeah.
That I got the feeling that's probably a major component of how they did this. Yeah.
Well, actually, I was reading about the guy who wrote this last night after I finished. And he basically says like he got into writing after like doing lots of running D&D campaigns. And he said like, "Oh, I still sort of kind of write like a DM." And I was like, "Well, yeah, you can see that in Disco Elysium. Like he clearly sort of sits down and thinks about all the directions you can go in each conversation with each character. And that it's really cool that he got the opportunity to build a game like this and actually realize that potential because it's incredible.
Kirk McDonald brought up the roll at the start of the game. When you try to slip away from Garta when he asked to settle your bill. And I think one of y'all succeeded at that, right? Or
I don't think I did.
Yeah, I
okay.
don't remember.
Well, you can literally just run away. It doesn't solve anything. You just you have because you have to come back. It's
Yeah,
great.
of course. Yeah.
I didn't fail it. So I'm wondering how that went, Kirk. But seems cool.
Mm.
But the other what Prof mentions about how or Kirk actually mentions about how failing the roles can lead to more interesting successes and the more interesting results than the successes, I think is also really true. Like the name Raphael Ambrosius Cousteau that you can get at the beginning, which can like go through the entire playthrough. You can say it like every single time you introduce yourself. Comes from a failed conceptualization role when you first meet Kim. So
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting. Like, there's for a lot of the narrative choices, I guess, failing. You're just interacting with a character, so there's nothing to get from it other than continued characterization of you and the person you're talking to.
Yeah.
And so failing is just kind of like it plays into the narrative of who Harry is. He's just a kind of a fuck up cop sometimes.
Yeah, I really like
speaking of
Prof's point about yeah, like the best DMs make it so that failures are interesting as well. And I think that is something this game does a pretty good job of.
Kirk describes what happens when you fail that roll, which is you you run away, jumping backwards, giving the guy the double bird, and then you crash into the wheelchair,
Oh god.
which is awful. Poor Lita.
Alejandro says, I crashed into Lena and died because I hadn't figured out how to heal my morale. Which is, and that's I mean, like, that's what the game is, you know, and it's so, and this is a perfect example of, we've talked about how this game is like a great narrative art form and stuff, but it's fucking hilarious as well.
Oh, it's so funny. I laugh like every time I play, there's like 2 or 3 conversations that make me laugh out loud.
Yeah.
It's so, it's excellent.
And not just the hilarity, the writing itself is just very good. Like some of the word choices and stuff by a lot of the more poetic thought, or what do you call them, thoughts, like the parts of yourself, like it's
Skills.
just yeah, like some of the skill, like just it's very well written.
The shivers roles are always so good. Where it tells you about like the sensations of your feeling, and then the narrative eye pans over to another part of the city and sort of describes that in another poetic way. Yeah, it's excellent.
Or just like the limbic system and the lizard brain every time
Oh
you go
yeah.
to sleep.
Oh yeah.
Like the way they talk is so iconic. Like yeah.
Did y'all do karaoke? Did y'all sing karaoke?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
Couldn't
well,
find a tape.
which one did you succeed or fail?
I succeeded, I think.
Okay, well, so if you succeed, the ancient reptilian brain sings it. If you fail, it's a limbic system, and it's like just horrendous, and it's beautiful, and it's so, when you get done, and it's like this pained, like voice cracking voice the entire time, like on the verge of sobbing closer to the end, and it's just like sounds so pathetic, and no one claps afterwards, and Kim goes and tells you, you're like, how was it? And he was like, that is what being a cop in the RCM is like. You captured it perfectly. And he like pats you on the back. Yeah.
Oh, what a moment.
It's great. It's beautiful.
Yeah, to take us back to the decisions and failure and stuff, I want to touch on one thing, which is there was one point where I had failed a few white checks and I just didn't have anything to do. I was kind of like running around trying to figure out how I can get some EXP so I can level up and retry one of these 1 or 2 white checks, which are kind of like blocking me. So my 5th day was just me reading a book to wait for a thing to process so that I could continue a different thing. And that happened a few times where I kind of felt like I was running out of things to do. But apart from that, very smooth.
I've heard other people have that complaint. I had the opposite. I was always drowning in stuff to do. But I think I accepted everything that was thrown at me.
Yeah, who says no to a task? Honestly,
Yeah.
I don't know.
So yeah,
Yeah.
until pretty late in the game, I had refused to work too much with Joyce or Eva because I hated them
That's
both,
fair.
and so that felt like I was kind of like it felt like the game was saying, "Hey, either pick this side or this side," and I was saying, "No, I don't want to pick either of these sides,"
How very
which
pale
maybe
of
is
you.
what caused it.
I think you have to do them both, don't you?
I
Not
almost
really.
had zero interactions with Joyce. Like I
Huh.
really did nothing for Joyce in the end.
Really?
Yeah.
I did everything for both of them. I was playing both sides.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's really interesting. I definitely had the feeling of directionlessness sometimes, particularly in the later days where it's like there's like 5 different threads and I'm not really sure which one to do right now. It's not like I didn't know what to do, but I didn't know which one to do. But
Yeah, I get that. I definitely was sometimes just like, this one's closest. Let's
Mhm.
go do that.
Yeah, very just like you could wander over and suddenly
Yeah.
you're going into the behind of the bookstore and exploring an abandoned commercial center. So
Yeah, but I like that. Like I
yeah.
almost preferred the stuff that wasn't chasing the main mystery. Like I was
Oh
always
yeah.
there for the side quests. Like anything to just like explore this random fucking building. Like I'm
Yeah.
immediately on board. So yeah,
Though you mentioned getting like stuck with the white checks, it is worth mentioning that I think we all agree that like the game does have an issue with soft blocks, like these sort of unplanned for and unfixed ways that you can get just stuck. I know Elliot, you had the one on day 2 when you ran out of money.
yeah. Well, so I made it to 2 a.m., which is when you can no longer interact with anyone except Gart and Joyce, and I didn't have 20 real, so I couldn't afford the room.
Mm-hmm.
And then yeah, so I basically lost about an hour to trying to scrounge up the funds, and eventually managed to go into the pawn shop, like by going back to a save that still had access to the pawn shop and like selling a bunch of stuff. I got to 20.
Yeah.
But yeah, like
Yeah,
that was really annoying.
Yeah, they shouldn't. Yeah, they shouldn't have done that. Day 1, they have that all planned out. If you don't make enough money, which is pretty likely, there's like 5 different ways to solve that though on day 1, but on day 2, it's just if you didn't think to save the money during the day, there's just nothing you can do after that
Well,
point.
and the
So.
annoying thing was I had the $25 check from Everard,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't give that to Gart. You have to take it to Fritte, the shop, to cash it in. But that was closed, and it was like like the simple fix to this soft lock would be
Yeah,
to letting
and
that stay open or something. Yeah.
yeah, and it's been a year since. It's like wild that they still haven't. And there's like 1 or 2 others as well.
Yeah. But
Mandatory checks that if you run out of level ups and you don't have any way to level up, you can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one that I felt like I was blocked on for a while was the authority check with Titus, where I just every time I tried it, I failed, and I was scrounging up skill points, and that I didn't have any spare. So
that one has a
mine was
couple of ways
Kuno.
around, but yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I one of the last checks I managed to do was the empathy check with Kuno. Especially because I actually passed it the first time, but then picked the wrong dialogue, so I got booted back out, and I had to redo the roll.
You have to redo the roll?
Yeah,
I didn't know that. Huh.
Yeah, so you can sort of do if you pass the empathy check with Kuno, then you have to like whisper to him to get him to like sort of not trust the
Right.
Kuno S as much and trust you
Right.
more. And I went too hard against the Kuno S, and so she sort of came back in and took him away from me, and then it was like I had to do the roll again, and I think it was even a bit harder. And that was like it took me till after the tribunal, I think it was, to actually get no, it must have been before. It was right before the tribunal to actually pull it off.
I didn't know that.
Did you want to introduce this next clip, Alexandra?
Oh, is that the when we're talking about play conditioning?
Yes.
So talking about the genre of these RPGs and stuff, the main way you interact, right, is the dialogue, but also those checks, right? And almost the vast majority of the games, at least that I know of, that employ these percentage checks, they have these built-in assumptions, and Disco Elysium just totally tears them down. And we'll talk about the tie one after this, but this is my favorite. It's one of the early lessons you learn, right? Which is that just because there's a check does not mean succeeding is actually a good outcome. So if you want to play it. And is there sound for it? Or?
That's the spirit.
Okay.
Don't even waste your breath asking about the game. They wouldn't know anyway. They're way past their prime.
So I failed this check.
You are immediately surprised by the ball's lack of weight. No matter, you'll make it work.
Merde! Bordel de merde! What the hell is your problem?
So, yeah, it's also much better in the moment when you actually do it, because you click the other dialogue options and there's so much like build up of like you're focusing yourself and you're gonna throw this ball and
like
you are now a man ball. It's great. And yeah, so it does a really good lesson. Right at the check has like +2 for acting without hesitation, right? And it just really, so you start thinking about, okay, I'm acting without hesitation. I'm acting without knowing what it's going to do. And then you do it and you're like, oh, that was dumb. I don't know why I did that. I did that because there was a check, and doing a check is always good. So
I like the contrast you're bringing up, because like we have touched on the idea of like failures can sometimes be good, but I like this idea that you're bringing up that also sometimes you can succeed and that's not a good thing. Like think about what you're doing. I feel like this is the lesson you're being taught there. It's like, yeah, sure, you succeeded, but what you were doing was fucking dumb. Like,
yeah.
Do
you happen to have the clip where you died trying to grab the tie?
I don't, unfortunately.
Should have asked for it.
But just to explain it to everyone, so I started the game and I only had 1 health. And I failed the check to grab the tie, so I had the heart attack and died. So I started a new save, got the 2nd health bar this time, failed the check again, but didn't die because I have 2 health now. Managed to get it on this 3rd try, and then read the rest of the options, which include turning the fan off. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, okay, I need to like read all of the options before I dive in. Like I really, really liked that as a lesson in my first session, because it was like, it was right there. Like I just didn't even read the other options because the check was on top and it was shiny.
Yeah, and then also, I mean, that's the thing with the genre. The genre is never, I mean, if you're talking like XCOM or any of these other checks, or of these other games with dialogue checks or anything like that, Mass Effect or whatever, if the option is there, it's basically just set. There's never really, especially in dialogue based things, it's just like there's no way to affect it from within the dialogue. And that one really hammers it into you of just like, oh yeah, if there's a logical thing that would help, it's gonna help.
Yeah, and not just that, but you know, as you're playing through, you'll get these like +1 or -1 to a specific check based on conversations you've had. Often in that very same dialogue tree, you'll walk through a bit, and then you've got a check, or you can ask them a question. If you ask the question and you kind of play through it correctly, you uncover a piece of information that makes the check easier.
Yeah,
it's all very like coherent in a strong way.
Or you get minuses, like if you
if you fuck it up.
If you, I think it's like when you're taking the body down, if you respond to the jabs of Kuno and Kness, then like you get discouraged and you do even worse. Basically,
I had that.
It's great.
Like that empathy check with Kuno that I struggled with, that I mentioned, I had 2 +1s and 2 -1s because of the various interactions I'd had with him throughout the couple of days. So it was like, because I'd shot at the Kuno S, I had like a -1. But then, because I told him he was cool, I had a +1. Like, yeah, it was it was very fun, sort of constantly learning the ways you could impact those dice rolls just by
Hmm.
engaging with the characters as characters, and like that mix of narrative and gameplay mechanics is what this game is just so strong at.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'll add to it as well that, we touched on the idea of like a lot of these choices feeling, or not feeling minor, but tangibly being minor. And I'll point to like the fact that it'll impact your ability to fail or succeed checks, I think also helps hammer this home. With like, there's a point where I got the drugs out of Kuno's dad's house, Kuno's apartment, whatever.
Yeah.
And Kuno's like, "Oh, can I have these?" And I was like, "Well, I'm not going to give them to you, but I know that's going to make future checks with you harder." And so it really like it gives narrative, but also solid mechanical, tangible weight to some of these decisions.
Yeah, and that was part of the time. I've talked about like how inconsistent I felt with the role playing, and that was a big cause of that as well. It's like sometimes I would hesitate to be the superstar, like madman cop, because I was like, oh shit, this is gonna make it harder if I don't just like do the sensible thing right now. So there were definitely a few times I wussed out because of those consequences.
You didn't internalize the madman
No,
cop enough.
exactly.
Elliot. Screw the consequences.
um, yeah. I mean, I just even like so many of the other things like checks that like I'm just gonna have to come back to the fan as an example, but just little things like learning about the environment and learning to think about what the check actually is. I feel like that is
Hmm.
what this game is just so good at, is like to understand how to make it easier or harder for yourself. You need to understand what the check is asking you to do, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's great because
That's
it's
the
something that
spirit.
changes how people who are familiar with the game have to think, and also challenges people who just like this is a video game and come into it with video game assumptions.
Yeah, yeah, it certainly made me play differently to how I expected to play, like half an hour in.
Mm.
So to move into like much more just straight up mechanical stuff, I wanted to talk about how, so there's effectively two main ways you're controlling how Harry grows and how your roles are going to work. And
Hmm.
that's like stats and thoughts. And I think it's so interesting that you have this balance of the two. Actually, I'm going to be honest. Most of the way as I was playing the game, I hated that there were both of them. It felt like it was overloading me and I didn't know what to do. But the more I think on it after having played the game, the more I really like the way that like stats are just, very classic RPG shit. Like you level up, make yourself better at something. Whereas thoughts are like this great gamble that you sort of enter where you can like do something and it might be much more generally helpful. It might be very specifically helpful, but you're going to have to invest time in it and you don't actually know what it's going to be. You could guess
Hmm.
based on what it is contextually, but um I wish I'd engaged with thoughts a lot more. Like you're sort of seeing on the screen now, those are my thoughts that I had in the game. I filled that
You
up
had so many. How can you say you wanted to engage your thoughts more? You
because
filled all of them
I
up.
I filled
Well,
all
I think
I
it's
filled all of that up
wild
halfway
that
through
you
day 2.
didn't, Ruben.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
But no, that Ruben, that's what mine looked like halfway through day 2, and it's what it looked like at the end of the game. Like once I filled them
Oh,
up, I
okay.
never. The only one I ever forgot was the racism one I had to take on to get past what's his face. Um,
Measure head.
yeah, and then I immediately forgot it and replaced it with the next one. But those are basically the first 12 thoughts that I unlocked, and
Yeah.
then I
Interesting.
never went back to that screen, and I regret it now because if you look at the bonuses I'm getting, it's basically all minuses, and I wish I'd noticed that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe because of the cost of forgetting a thought.
Yeah,
Like I also was very reluctant to forget thoughts because it was such an investment.
exactly. Yeah.
I don't know.
And the gambling, like in the moment, like I like it sitting on it after playing the game, but when I was like in the game, it was just like, oh god, I'm gonna have to forget something and put this in the slot for 8 hours, and it might not even be good. Like I don't know what I'm gonna get out of it. Like I think there either needed to be less thoughts or more slots. Like it was,
I would like more slots for sure. I would disagree though that like the investment definitely felt important, but after you get actual art degree or Wumpty Dumpty Dome Center, which is such a great moment, um, you gain levels so fast that it's kind of like might as well.
Well,
At least that's how I felt.
Alex, I had Wompty Dumpty Dom Center, but I never internalized it
Yeah,
because
same.
I didn't know that I
Yeah.
didn't know that it was going to do that for me.
Yeah, actually, so one thing I do want to note is that leveling up is extremely unbalanced. Like the two that I just mentioned, Actual Art Degree, Humpty Dumpty Dawn Center, are the two best thoughts. I mean, if you're power gaming or whatever. The only other leveling up, there's like two other ones, but they're very minor in comparison. One is just like Talk Communist, and the other one is you get 1 XP every time you click a green bubble.
I have that one.
Yeah, and those they add up, but not nearly as much as those first two.
Yeah, I had the Actual Art Degree from quite early on in the game, and yeah, like it was huge.
It gives
you had like 30 skill points at the end of the game that you hadn't spent, right, Elliot?
We'll talk about that in a second. But to talk about the imbalances, yeah, those are two. Humpty Dumpty Dawn Center and Actual Art Degree are both influenced by 2 intelligence skills, and they were responsible for probably like the 50 or more % of my level ups, because you would go into a conversation, and just because you're conceptualizing different things as you go through the conversation, there would be a level up almost every single every time I talked to someone. So
I had a few conversations, and if it was just a very conceptual conversation, I might get 2 to 3 levels just out of talking to that person.
And if you aren't playing an artsy cop character, then you're just not gonna get it. And if you just decided not to internalize Humpty Dumpty Dom Center, maybe because it's a silly name, you're just not gonna get it. And it's weird. Like, I'm not necessarily saying that like the game needs more ways to level up, because like failing is still interesting. It's still fine if you have low stats. It's just like, why is it so incredibly unbalanced for just those two thoughts to kind of make the entire they just blow all the other stats or other thoughts out of the water in their effect.
I mean,
failure is good, but the fact that leveling up sometimes blocks you from progressing plot lines with the white skill checks, and 2 means that I was very, very reluctant to spend points on thoughts when I didn't guarantee that it was something that would be useful to me. Like, I just didn't spend my skill points there because I didn't have enough of them.
Yeah, on the other case, I had skill points out the wazoo, and I don't know, it didn't feel like it made me my character stronger just because there are so many skills and stuff. Like, I almost don't care that some of the skills are like OP, because I don't get the impression that without them my playthrough would have been that different, because we're only talking like a couple of stats going up a couple of things, which is only like 20% of your rolls.
When we're talking your playthrough, Elliot, with the like at least 20 unused levels, they probably would have come up a bit. I'm not saying you would get a +1 in every single stat, but you definitely could have picked like 3 or 4 to rock it up way high. And the thing that really does is not just the passing of the checks is kind of a minor thing, actually. The main effect of leveling up your skills is the passive times that they come up, which you don't even see most of those checks. So I think that's the main. I can definitely get that, like, you don't necessarily feel that, especially in the beginning, before you fully get a grasp on what they're doing. I think it first like clicked with me for like perception, because those are just passive. What does the environment look like? But yeah, they all have that passive effect of when they pop up to tell you things.
Sure. I certainly felt like I was getting a hell of a lot of passives, but I guess
there's a lot more.
Yeah, I guess I don't like. I think. Yeah, like for me, I was reluctant to invest in either of these two things because, to focus in on the skills for a sec, like this is something I think I mentioned in my stream, and I'm sure this will be controversial to some people, but there's too many skills. I'd halve the number of skills. I think the problem for me was I was constantly reluctant to invest in any of them because, each one only represents like 7% of rolls, and it's like, well, I don't want to invest in that one for these 2 rolls I've got or whatever, and then it's like never going to come up again. And that might have been me getting too bogged down in like wanting it to be useful, but like it just meant I never invested in any of them because there were too many and they all felt equally pointless and useless to invest in.
I think the way that it was probably the way that it worked for the people that it worked for, I think it was that like you would get an attachment to certain skills and you just kind of arbitrarily put them in there. So like I had 8 points in Inland Empire or whatever because it was interesting. It was all the like supernatural stuff or whatever. And so I wanted it to be higher. I was trying to build the cop that I wanted it to be. But I also very much get like, yeah, there being that many skills definitely felt like you have this single like point which is like so like solid. It's represented as a shape, so it very much feels like tangible, and you're spending it in this one tiny thing that doesn't like give you a big boost. Like the thoughts definitely did at first, and then replacing them obviously feels like it costs a lot more.
I think also the fact that because there are so many, I think the lines are a little blurry between like what type of thing a stat will help with.
That's the other thing. Yeah, I'd say it wasn't until after the tribunal I would have felt comfortable being like, okay, like these are the sorts of checks empathy covers. These are the sorts of checks like other things do. Like, you know, for the first 4 days, I didn't know what half of them related to really.
Yeah, definitely.
And so Walbo mentions 2 things in the chat. The first is that the signature skill doesn't matter like at all, which is very, very true.
Yeah, that was so wild. I spent so long picking my signature skill in the character creation and it had no impact.
Like once you get like what one extra thing in that skill,
right? You get one extra point in that skill, so 1 level, and then you open up a level up slot for the rest in that row, which is really that's what the main power up is. In my opinion, if you want to power game it, the way would be to like just put it into your lowest stat, and then that way you can level up those up more. But I think the one good effect it does have is that it gives you more of an attachment to it. I picked Inland Empire, and I cared about Inland Empire after that, right? But other than that, it's
I
it
like
should
what
have
he
had more.
Suggested, like it should start boosted at like 3 or 4 points or something, like at least. I think if you're gonna sell it in character creation as your signature skill, it should get some sort of massive boost because, like as you said, like you're investing in Inland Empire, and it's like give you a boost if that's what you're doing.
And the power gaming way to do it is put it in your lowest stat, which would mean that like your signature skill you're actually shit at. So and the other thing Wabba mentions is also that it definitely doesn't incentivize you to spend your points reactively in response to failed checks, because that's like the one mechanical way of like that it has an effect that it reopens a white check. But it definitely I think that's like not a fun way to play it, but that's the way that it does teach you to, because it's a lot that doesn't take into account at all the passive effect, which is really where it matters. So
I get what people are saying with regards to using them reactively, but I guess for me it always felt like, oh, well, sure, I have like 3 empathy checks now, but I didn't know how much longer the game was going to go. Like, I don't know. And that may just be me being the kind of guy who finishes a game with like every grenade is picked up because I'm saving them for when I need them.
Well, that's hardly a thing unique to you. Like I mean, it's a meme for a reason, right? So, I think it's their own fault for making it something that you could hoard and something that you're incentivized to hoard. Although hoarding more than like 4, I can't believe it. Like, how many do you have at some point? Do you know?
Oh no, because it stops counting after 13.
Yeah, but there was that moment at the end where you put 1 skill point in every single skill, which is at least 20, right?
20.
I mean, it's 24, but some of them were maxed out already. I think it was like 20 or 25 that you had stored up at the end.
I guess for me, the problem was I filled up the thoughts really easily, and to touch on what some people say about the thoughts, I guess the problem for me was I had these 12 thoughts, and half of them had been useless, and so it was kind of like I didn't want to invest in any of the others because I had no idea which ones would be cool or not. And then it was also like this is just I guess me being a bit lazy, but it was like I didn't remember which one of my thoughts were doing what, and it was like I didn't want to have to go through and try and figure out which one was the most expendable. Like that was really the biggest problem for me with juggling the idea of getting rid of one and replacing it was just like there's so much to manage there. Like yeah.
I will say that I think that might be like something that does not affect most people because it does summarize the stat effect. And I mean, in most games I play, I usually know what all the items and things I have do. So
yeah, see, I was tracked after about 4.
Yeah, me
but
too.
that's fair.
To cap off the discussion about the thoughts for a bit, I think the thing that I think is the coolest about the thoughts is it's such a perfect way to represent this thing of like a detective mulling over things in their head.
Yeah.
Like it's such a cool mechanic to have to represent that in the world. And like the times where I was mulling over, like there's one that I thought was really cool where I was like thinking about, oh, what might be a weakness in armor, and I could see it and I was like, okay, I know this is going to be so useful because I know it's going to come up that there's going to be a showdown with some people in armor. So I'm going to think about it and try and mull over like, what is a weak point in this piece of armor, for example? And it's just like, it's a very cool way of representing that. I thought it was awesome.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. I'm so interested in them as a mechanic because I love this idea of, like having them as an aside from the main skill points because they have all these weird, some are more specific, some are more general, like they're very scattershot in what they represent. And I think that's so cool. It ended up being just a bit too much for me to like handle them with all the like the gambling involved where you don't quite know what perk you're going to get out of it. Like I normally, like when I have a mechanic like this in a game and we talk about it in Game Club, I usually try to present how I would change it to make it better for me at least. And with this one, I don't know what the fix is. Like I'm so torn. I don't know how you manage thoughts in a way that would work for me, except for having a lot less of them.
Or just removing the cost of forgetting them, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, or maybe remove the cost, but you do like
you'd have to relearn them. Like if there was a thing where it was like to re-internalize a thought, it would take like half the original time it took to internalize it or something.
Okay, that would work. I think it's not a permanent loss.
Yeah, like it's easier to pick up again, but there's still a cost to constantly switching
and
stuff
like
out.
Maybe after you unlock it that first time, you still have the skill point invested in it or something.
I thought the skill points were for the slots, right? So if I forget one,
but I'm just if it was for the thoughts themselves instead, which would basically be the same thing. But
true.
There's things we could do regarding how many skills there were. I think there's a little bit too much. I wouldn't want to cut it down like too much. I think having a big variety is a like important factor, but like if there was only 16 or something, I think that would have definitely been enough. So
for me, half feels about right. Like it's 24 at the moment. I reckon 12 would have been great.
And there's some that like I feel like I wanted to care more about, but I just couldn't. Like so some were just so niche, like hand-eye coordination, which it does matter a couple times. It was like most of the times that it mattered, it was just like catching coins that were thrown at you. So
reaction speed, where the only time it matters is when you fuck up and drop something and you're trying to catch it again.
Reaction speed has a couple more, but of like when you have to say something real fast or like understand something really quick. But I didn't know that until halfway through the game for sure. I didn't know that it applied to dialogue until later.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is like the Motorix ones in general for me, and Physique actually, often felt like the least important because they were the ones that came up the least in terms of the passive checks. And for me, it was like the meat of the game and where I was spending most of my time was in conversations. So the psyche and the intellect ones felt more important. And maybe that's because of how I built my character. I don't know, but it was sort of like I'd get these checks, like white or red checks for Physique and Motorix, and that felt like mostly what they were for. Whereas the intellect and the psyche came up a lot more because they were common for both.
They actually do come up a lot in dialogue, so it is partially because you had them low, but you also didn't know that. So it doesn't like for example Half-Light and some of the others comes up constantly in conversations, usually telling you to punch them in the face. That is its main component, is just being really angry at people. But all of them have those kinds of effects. But it definitely, I mean, I have no idea what hand-eye coordination does in dialogue. I never had it high enough, but it definitely, like, it's unintuitive for the physical stuff to matter in dialogue conversations for sure. Yeah, as another ship mentions, it's easy to miss how relevant your bad skills are because you don't see how many of the passives you miss. That's definitely true.
Yeah.
I also would say that's for some of the thoughts too. Like some of the thoughts really, really matter in conversations, and some of them don't, and it's really hard to know which ones do and which ones don't.
Yeah, that's a whole. Yeah, the thoughts are a gamble, and sometimes that's just
Well, like, I just wish it was a little bit more clear of like how important they are to hold on to. Like, for example, the communist thought, the original, the Mazovian socioeconomics, that one, you turn communist or whatever, but even if you get rid of it, you still can have communist dialogue options. Like, I got rid of it halfway through and I still did the full communist like quest line, but I don't know if I missed anything during that quest line because I didn't have the thought, you know? And
yeah,
I just don't know what I'm missing.
Yeah, don't know what you're missing is a big thing in this game. And I do want to quickly shout out, this is not the developers' faults, but something that really annoyed me as I was doing my playthrough is, God, the information on this game online is weak. Like, the wiki for this game is woefully incomplete. It's like, when I did try to look stuff up, particularly after playing, like, there's so little clarifying stuff. Like, yeah, that sort of question of like, what does forgetting the communism thought lose me? That's the sort of thing where usually when I'm playing a game, I will just immediately like head to the game's wiki and it'll have all that laid out. Whereas this one, you're lucky to have a page for the thought. And it's just like, oh my god, like, there needs to be some sort of fan campaign to sort the wiki out, because it really interferes with your ability to sort of play and just like read. Like what?
Right.
Yeah, like arresting Klausya, like that sort of whole choice came up, and I was really freaking out about whether to do it, and I decided not to, and then afterwards like went to look it up, and it ended up being a fucking IGN page that was the only place that would tell me what happens if you choose to. Like, yeah.
Which is weird because this game's been out for a year, but yeah, it's a character or player created thing, so I can kind of understand. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm being a hypocrite because I'm not going to go touch the wiki. Like, I don't have time for that. So like I shouldn't really hate on the fact that it isn't there, but like so many other games have it. I was quite surprised this was a game that had a wiki that was so incomplete.
Maybe just because how huge the game is, that might be a factor.
True.
But even then, yeah, like what the dice do, some of them still don't have complete entries on the thing. So
yeah, I tried to look up right towards the end. I hadn't bought anything from the bookstore, and I was like, oh, are there any of these that I should still buy that will give me cool quests or whatever? All of them had wiki pages that basically just had where you could buy them, and they had a uses heading, and it was empty underneath. And I was like, oh, come on.
I think those books are useless, though. I mean, you mainly just read them.
I found a Reddit thread where people were sort of theorizing on it, and it sounded like at best they get you like an extra conversation or something, but there was nothing major.
You buy a book of cockatoos, and then you get to pick your spirit animal from the book of cockatoos.
What did you pick?
I can't remember which one I picked now.
There was one that was blatantly the superstar cockatoo. I picked that one. So yeah, that was the only book I bought because I'd had the conversation with the lady out front about cockatoos. So then when I saw the cockatoo book, I was like, fuck yes. Whereas like all the like, the weirdly racist ones and stuff, like, I was like, I don't know what buying this gets me. So I didn't. Yeah. Because I was short on cash.
Well, it gives you knowledge and it fulfills you. That's what reading does. That's what literature does, Elliot. It makes you a better person. So that should have been incentive enough.
Useless.
Should we talk about the conversation tree stuff?
Yes, it's still out there.
We've been talking about dialogue options and all that jazz. Let's
yeah, we talked around it. Actually, sort of a fair bit. So we'll just have this tribunal playing in the background. But I was I was constantly impressed with the versatility of the conversation trees. It almost always felt like there was an option or two that suited the character I was trying to roleplay. Um, and like it's just impressive the sheer amount of content in this game. Like something I think everyone realizes as they're playing and seeing how different stuff is. Like comparing my run to Ruben's at the end, I was like, holy shit! And we like between the two of us, we probably haven't covered anywhere near all of it. There's so
Mhm.
much.
Yeah.
Like I guess we can talk about the design of them a lot. Like there's a lot of clever design going into how these all fit together to be so fulfilling. But we should take a moment to shout out the impressiveness of just the amount of content.
Yeah. And something that is, I don't know if it's not really about like the content itself, but about how it's presented, which is that everything you say as Harry, it's up to you about how genuine it is. Because the characters are just going to react to you saying it, but some of the dialogue options I would pick because I'm like sort of saying it sarcastically, but that might not even have been like the intended way, but it still worked, and it never really. There was never a point where like I picked a dialogue option and I was like, why the hell are they reacting this way? I don't
Yeah.
understand. That never happened.
I had maybe one or two where I
Mhm.
underestimated or misunderstood slightly what I was saying, but
Sure.
yeah, I actually got one dialogue option right towards the end of the church quest line where I was given the same line as two different options, but because the second option was say it sarcastically, like at the end in brackets, which I really
Yeah.
enjoyed. Um, but yeah, I think to your point, and this is a big thing we sort of touched on. I think what this game does really well, yeah, because obviously there isn't an unlimited number of dialogue options. Like usually you are being presented with three or four. And I
Mhm.
think the reason that it almost always feels like there's a right one is because the game is very good at steering you into a direction that aligns with some of the options it's going to give you. Like it works on all these axes that I didn't quite notice were being tracked until like 2/3 of the way through the game. You know, you got things like Superstar Cop, sorry cop. You obviously being tracked with like communist, fascist, like it frames everything around these axes and helps you internalize them, which makes you better at role playing according to its rules because it's like pushing you to play the way it wants. It's a really cool subtle effect I didn't notice till towards the end, but like the reason I always felt like there was a right option isn't just because I was choosing to role play something, but also the game was steering me to think I was choosing something that actually I think it was slotting me into something and
Mm.
without me noticing. I
Mhm.
really like that.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
Miss Silva mentions how you get the option to lie sometimes. Like
Yeah.
it's an explicit part in the choice to say that you're lying, which is great because like you could have picked the like okay, the example that she brings up is I'm going to throw Kuno's dad's drugs away and I'm going to throw Kuno's dad's drugs away lie, right?
Mm.
And that's great because like you could do the first one and then not do it. You would still be lying, right? But like because it's an option in the dialogue, it sort of legitimizes it and makes
Yeah.
it so you can like have that as a plan rather than like something outside of the game that you were like sort of worrying about like am I going to be allowed to do this, you know. It just explicitly shows that yeah, you have the option to do this thing.
Yeah, as an example of how much this game got in my head, my plan was so Everard gives you that thing where you have to get two signatures so he can build the youth
Mm-hmm.
center, and you have the option to forge them and do that. So I went to forge them, but then I got worried because I was like, well, Everard has spies everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna know I didn't talk to the people. So I went up and talked to the people, gave them the letter, and then before they signed it, took the letter back. I did that with two people and then went to try and forge their signatures because I was like, at this point in the game, I was like, I legitimately am worried that if I just went and forged signatures and
Right.
didn't talk to them, Everard might know about that. Um, and I mean, cool. Like I love that I was that paranoid and expected that much out of the game. Because I don't know if that's true. I tried looking it up and I couldn't find out.
Well,
But
did you forge it?
No, I failed the check anyway, so
Yeah, I
Okay.
failed the check as well. I was so curious what was going to happen.
I guess we gotta find out. I'll try to my second
yeah,
playthrough.
I looked up that part of it. So I guess spoilers. It never catches up with you because by the time Everett finds out they're forged, it's after the end of the game anyway. So
Okay,
it's
cool,
actually
cool.
something you can get away with, which is like I was legitimately worried about that at the time. Like that I would get in serious shit from Everett if he caught me forging them, which is why I'm going to all these bloody troubles of like running around and like giving people the letter and then taking it back so I can forge their signature.
Right, right.
I went to forge it and failed, and then just talked to them, and they both the washerwoman and Lillian, is that her name? I
Yeah.
think were
Mhm.
like, oh, I don't really give a shit, and if we do this, it sounds fine. And I was like, yeah, all right, whatever. So I just did it.
The old lady, I think, does do more protests though.
Oh, yeah,
She
she wouldn't sign it for me. I was failing the suggestion check.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to her about it and was like it might be fine. It's got some problems. You know, there's this thing where you might lose access to your street. And she then was just like, yeah, whatever, sign it. So I didn't really worry about it too much, really. I thought it was being set up as like big ethical choice, but then both the characters, when I talked to them, were like, yeah, whatever.
Well, if you go back and talk to her again, or no, it's a different check. I don't remember where it is, but you think about it, and then you realize that the real plan is that the construction noise will
Make them
Well,
leave.
like,
is-
push
drive
them
them away. Yeah, and so when you talk to her again, you can mention it, and she says like, "Well, I'm stubborn, but like, yeah, this is really too bad that he's doing this." So
For me, she was refusing to sign it, so I got the drunk guy, the guy who's looking for his coat.
Idiot Doom Spiral.
Yes, that's it. He signed
He's
it for
great.
me, and I was like,
High
does he even live
concept.
here? Like, does this count? Who cares?
away.
Like, I was like, I hope not, because like my plan was to forge them. I failed the forgery check, so I had to get legit ones, and I was like, well, I hope his doesn't count.
Then you failed to get legit ones as well, yeah. I want to talk about when we're talking about kind of the conversational choices. I think one of the problems that I had with it was there were a few choices that I had that, like, I didn't. The significance of it wasn't clear to me making the choice. This didn't happen that frequently, but I think one example was, we were having conversations with Claudia, and there were a few times, specifically around arresting her or not, where I didn't necessarily make a choice to arrest her or not. But then afterwards, Kim kept mentioning that I had chosen not to arrest her, like it was a big deal. And I was like, no, I didn't. We just kind of chatted, and then, nothing really happened. In fact, I had the thought of like, okay, there's clearly more to do here, so I'll get back to talking to her at some point. But then she had vanished, and Kim was like, oh, you decided not to arrest her and stuff like that. It was kind of, I don't know. There are a few times where things like that happened to me.
Yeah, it's particularly early on in the game. I could not tell the difference between when you were given a list of options to choose from, when it was one of the situations where you were going to get to go through like all of them and then leave, or when you were
Yeah.
like picking one of 5. And so like I would be willing to bet that about half of my like non-communist and non-superstar choices are times when I would just click the top one expecting to do all of them, but it turns out I accidentally chose like, a non-communist one of the options, and it ended things there, and I was always like, oh shit, like I hadn't even read the rest of them. Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
I got some UI stuff around
I
that.
think I feel like it might be a choice of like you're leaving that sort of thing ambiguous, but I don't think it's worth it as a choice. Yeah, it would have been just to color code them as the one choice to advance or all the choices to pick. Like it does a bit to signal it, and I think you can usually get a handle of it. But yeah, even if you are very familiar with it, I think you're still going to slip up sometimes, and I think that's a flaw. Yeah.
I can
There was
see
some
the
way the
argument.
choice would say like brackets move on or brackets
Mhm.
conclude, and it's very clear. Like, okay, I'm gathering some information, and then we're going to get to a decision point or something, and that was great. But sometimes it just wasn't clear at all.
Right.
Yeah, or like sometimes it would be that there are 5 options, but the fourth one would trigger something that would set it off. And I kind of I got into that towards the end because I liked the surprise. Like I think there was one conversation with Claudia that like got cut off because I picked an option that set her off. And like
Right.
I think it was Suggestion had told me not to say that. So it wasn't like the
Well,
game had given me
yeah.
that. But yeah, like yeah, I don't know. It definitely took me like this comes into a point we'll talk a bit more about later. I didn't feel like the game was that good at teaching me how it would work, and I can see that argument you brought up, Alexandra, for like how should it like that ambiguity actually being a good thing because like you want it to
Mm.
feel realistic, and that's how real conversations work. Like you don't know
I
the response you're going to get, but
yeah.
as a player, sometimes it was frustrating to like pick something, making the assumption I'd get to do more later, and finding out that that wasn't the case.
Yeah, I think it's an intentional choice. I don't think it was worth it. I think it's more confusing than, I don't want to say enlightening, but yeah, rather than teaching you a theme, I think it's a mistake off of confusion. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So we have 2 clips for this next one, so I'll just play the first one and then the second one, and then we can get cracking on it.
The hawthorn branches scrape the glass like bony fingers.
Interesting. It's not time yet, but I do have a thing for seeing that fucking door.
There's a little slide panel up there to let some air in. No need to open it in spring. It's still too cold outside.
Go for it, right?
Nothing.
Oh,
Even though you know you should see it, you don't. Just branches like black tangles of hair. Motionless. The wind in the yard doesn't reach the hawthorn. Maybe come back later and you can try again.
This is so brutal watching it
something
happen.
for that.
It wasn't time yet. You have to know of the girl. Return when you know more.
God, this game sometimes. It's bullshit. I got a 666, and you still went. Oh,
Yikes.
oh, I'm actually really mad. And so, for reference, I did have to re-roll to get that check later too. It wasn't like a gimme later on.
Did it at least give you a boost, or?
No, I had to get another. I actually got another 666 to get it later. So
Wow.
which is like
Yeah,
crazy,
that's.
but yeah. There's that one, and then
Ceiling height window.
come on, this next clip is fairly similar, I'll admit, but I just want to get this out of my system.
An old door, worn by elements, guards the depot. The wind has blown a sand dune in front of it.
Jesus,
The
20.
door hasn't been opened.
It's military. A service, probably something that is no longer there.
So I have a 3. So I literally need to get a 666.
You rattle the handle a bit, then
What?
push on the door with all your weight. It does not budge. Not only is it locked.
That one's weird because you got the 6s, but it says failure.
Literally. So it's like literally impossible. And so then I get a thought because I can't do it, but like, yeah, like
So
apart from those, like those are sort of definitely the 2 exceptions where like sometimes the railroadiness of the role play came through. Like both of those, I'm extremely salty about.
So with the one with the key, I will agree. The one with the bunker, I will actually pretty strongly disagree because if you internalize that thought, its whole point is that sometimes some doors are closed and you cannot get into them at all. There is nothing behind that bunker. It's just a door you can't open. And so the thought is like, oh, how do I get past it and stuff? And it's just like, yeah, you can't. And sometimes you just gotta accept that.
But then don't tell me that there's a 3% chance of success.
Yeah, exactly.
So I roll a
Don't make it a
666 and
check.
like
Yeah, but like, isn't that? I don't think you would if you had internalized the thought and like had thought about it and like felt about it, right? I don't think if it was just like you try to, you can't. Like that's a different feeling than you thought and you felt like there was a chance, except actually there isn't. I think that's a very different feeling.
I don't know. I just if you're gonna make it a check, I just think you need to have both options. Like make it one. Like that was the thing, right? Like 97% of people are gonna fail that check.
Well,
Right.
everyone is
Well, no, but I'm saying like
because it's inevitable.
what I'm saying, like if they put something behind it that's like whatever, but only 3% of players get it, then the other 97% get the thing. Like it's the failure and success stuff we praised the game for doing earlier. It's doing that cool thing in other places, and then there's just this
Mhm.
handful of ones where it's like it lets you do a check, and you have to fail, and it's like even if you succeed, it then just sort of goes, yeah, well, nah.
I still disagree because I think this is sort of a lesson that it can be especially taught to people who are safe scumming. Because I think it's inevitable that a lot of people will, and we can talk about that too. But if you save scum that, I save scummed it for a while before I got before I Googled, and then I was like, oh, you actually can't get into it at all. And then I internalized the thought, and the thought says, yeah, no, you can't get over it, basically.
Yeah.
Like you have to learn, right? So I think if they had put something behind there, if they had allowed a success, I think that totally would have undone that theme, basically. So I'm going to say strongly that you being disappointed and annoyed at it, I think that's the point. And I think it's a good point.
No, I think it's a dumb point because I'm annoyed.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Can't argue with that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to touch on like just sort of gripes with the game, like as a whole, like yeah. So there's a few little decisions like these too, where it's just like they're letting me do a check that if I can't do it, just I don't let me do it yet. I would say,
Yeah, that's fair.
but then
Or
sorry.
Yeah, and they should have done something where there will be a time later and then it will be easier for you to do it, or like you find the key but you don't know what it's for or whatever. Like they could have done something, but they didn't. So.
I mean, yeah, well, like that check, the first one there was like it was giving me a -12 because it's not time yet, which is the game saying you can't do this yet, and that's fine. But then they still let you roll, and they still tell you you've succeeded on a double six. So then to not give me anything, and make me re-roll it later, I'm just like, well, like just you shouldn't have let me even do it then. Like just say it's a 0% chance or whatever. I don't know. But like I guess yeah, like there's just a few other like I'll just get all these out in one go because again I'm gonna get whingy here, but I really did love this game. But oh my god, some of the stuff like the fast travel was awful in this game. It's very unclear how to use it when you first get it. It also just breaks at random points in the game. It needed more locations.
It seems buggy.
It needed more locations too. Everard and Joyce should have both been ones, especially if you need to get to the apartments.
I'm gonna say especially for Ever, considering he's locked behind like 3 loading screens.
Yeah. The white checks that it's like a bug in the game where some white checks don't disappear after you can no longer do them. I lost about 45 minutes to trying to figure out where the police cloak, how I could do the police cloak check because it was listed on the map.
But you already got it, right?
Well, because I'd gone through the
jumping.
Door. Well, because I had to internalize the racism thing. Like I'd gone through it, and I picked up the cloak, so I couldn't do that jump.
Right.
But I was like, I spent ages like walking around up there just trying to trigger the jump anyway because it was still listed. And then I got burnt by setting off the tribunal earlier than I would have liked because there's a piece of dialogue that tells you, and shout out to Miss Evil Doom who figured this out for us. So there's dialogue that warns you that when you go to fight Ruby, it's going to set things in motion that can't turn around. But it's an optional piece of dialogue. So I didn't get it. So I was like, oh, I'll quickly do this, and then I'll go back and do all this other stuff. And then I ended up setting off the tribunal with about like 6 quests I really wanted to finish, just not being things I could do anymore. So like that was a bit of a decision-y thing where it's just like, I don't know why that's behind a thing that is optional because it just led to me setting off parts of the game that I didn't want to do, and I feel like you need to be warned about that stuff. Like the island was much better. The island, they very much are like, if you hop on this boat, we're not coming back. And that was like good for me because I immediately turned around, went and finished all my other shit that I still had.
Right.
Yeah. Last little bitch and moan part for me. You already touched on it. The loading screens, like the bit where you're going between Titus and Glasgow, was a nightmare.
Flashbacks.
Like
horrifying. There's like 4 loading screens in like a minute long
Yeah.
walk that you
Well,
do 20 times.
It takes about a minute to get between them, but 40 seconds of that is the loading screens. And just as a little aside, like my computer is by no means a massive beast, but it is pretty solid. There is no reason that loading Clutch's room should take like 15 seconds. I like just as a Unity dev, I find that baffling.
I don't understand why Classier's room is even a different room from the outside.
Yeah,
like
I would guess because they don't want to load the the secret area with the pinball machines or something like that. But yeah, God knows.
Why not?
I don't know.
Like yeah, yeah. So like that was just one little bit where I was like, I don't understand. One of the greatest moments of my playthrough was when I realized that the fast travel from the whirling in rags works from the roof, from Klaus's place.
I still don't know that.
Does it?
Yeah, so I stopped going down and I would just fast travel
You
back.
fast travel to the ground. What a brilliant strat. Speed strats.
Yeah,
But
wow.
yeah, like
that was down when I do the speed runs later.
that was just like a real nonsense part where I was like constantly going between the two of them, and I was like, why is this a thing?
Yeah, you can unlock the elevator in the pinball, and that makes it one loading screen, but it's still and I think it's like it's so much dialogue and going back and forth. I feel like it's supposed to. I feel like it might have been written with in mind that you might wander off and do something in between.
Yeah,
but it feels really important, and it's not like the dialogue is like that long, for you to be like, okay, I'm done with this. It's long, but like not so long of like, okay, it's long in a way of just like I want to finish this, right?
Yeah, I did wonder that because I didn't convince the Hardy Boys that I had the authority or whatever to kickstart all that until like day 4, and so about halfway through I had the same thought of like, oh, am I like, is each of these conversations meant to be blocked by a day or at a time or something because I'm like 4 days behind? I'm doing 4 days worth of back and forth, but I don't think that's the case anymore.
There's no mechanical incentive that I know of to not do it all at once. And I think there should have been, at the very least, like Kim should have said something like, hey, this is getting heavy. Let's go do something else before we come back. Like at least that, but
yeah. So anyway, I guess that's the section where I just get all my little gripes out of just about bugs and small UX changes.
So do you have any more gripes, Elliot, before we wrap up this session?
Yeah, this one's a major one. Like this is actually a big design decision I want to talk about, which is the concept of death in this game. Is pointless at best and frustrating and stupid at worst. Like, okay, so I spent about 70% of the game with only 2 health and 2 morale because I didn't know how to upgrade them.
This was so funny when I finally said you had 30 unused skill points and you kept dying because you didn't have any health or morale.
I didn't realize I could upgrade them. I did that the second I actually read the little loading screen tip. But I guess before that, like, so I kept dying. I probably died like 30 to 40 times throughout my run. And it just like, so okay, if you die in a platformer, right? It sort of like encourages the gameplay loop because it's like, oh, I have to re-demonstrate my skill to get back to that point. So you're constantly growing because you're getting better at that part each time you sort of have to repeat it. That's not how it works with Disco Elysium. Like when I had to redo shit because I died, I was like fucking just, mashing buttons and clicking as fast as I could. Like dying did nothing but make me redo the same shit. And it wasn't like it was making me better at it. Like
you just didn't pick the options that led to your death that time.
Yeah, it didn't achieve anything. Whereas, like in most games where you die, it forces you to rethink things or get better, and that's not what Disco Elysium did. It just made me click buttons. So it just cost me time, and I hate punishments in games that are just you lose time in your real life.
I had something very similar where at the showdown with Ruby, you're taking physical damage as you're in this thing, and you take maybe 3 or 4 physical damage in total, and that was capping me out. Like that was as much as I had. And so I tried like 2 or 3 times to get through it without taking all that damage, and I just couldn't. And so eventually I just went and bought a bunch of drugs and came back and had to like redo it like 3 or 4 times before I finally got through. It was
Right.
yeah, it was rough.
And like, so we've touched on save scumming as well, but like, I think the save system in this game makes it easy to save scum, which is like, that's whatever. But things like the dying, when you pair those two together, at that point it starts to feel like the game is encouraging me to save scum. Like there were definitely a few times where I had 1 morale and no more. I can't remember the name of the stuff that lets you recover morale, but no for something.
Nosafed, is that
Yes, Nosafed.
Nosafed, yeah.
And so like I do a skill check or whatever, and it would kill me because I had the 1 morale. And so then it would take me back to my quick save that I'd done just before that conversation. I was like, well, I'll try again. Like I had a 58% chance. Like, and so I just keep going. It was like all the dying did was actually start to actively encourage save scumming. And
Right.
I can't assume that was the like when we're praising how the game teaches you that failures and successes can both be good or bad. There's bizarre to me
failures that are just bad. Yeah.
Yeah, but then it's bizarre to me that then they would allow / encourage save scumming.
Yeah. I like that there's a quick save. I don't like that there's a quick load. Like
for me, well, I guess
what other reason are you going to use that other than save scum?
Yeah, for me, quick save just sends the message of you should save scum. Like
I wonder if maybe instead of death forcing you to reload, if you like lose time instead, that would have been a better solution.
Yeah, like instead of death, it should be passing out.
You know, you wake up the next day or whatever.
Not quite the next day, but you pass out and you've lost like an hour or something. You know, like.
Mm.
Or, I mean, the other option is I usually criticize games for doing this, so I can't believe I'm going to say it, but like have save stations, like have limited save points, I suppose, like times when you can save. Make it harder to save, so that I can't just like quick save before every conversation to save scum it. I actually like Ruben's idea better, so I'm gonna take that back as a solution because I wrote that down before Ruben wrote his, and I think his is better. Like I think in-game punishment that like punishes me but doesn't. Well, actively encourage save scumming. Yeah.
When you had those, they were great. Like when you fuck up in a conversation and everyone's mad at you, and then you get a minus to your talking later. Yeah, those are great.
Yeah.
It feels rewarding. It feels good.
Yeah. Death is very boring.
Yeah, exactly. I would take.
Although
I would take the death mechanic out of the game almost entirely. If
I did like the newspaper snippets that you got when you died.
Yeah,
shitty cop had heart attack in simple conversation or whatever.
The problem is I started to run out of those fairly soon. I think the only one I laughed at towards the latter part was when I shot myself in the head. It was like crazy cop shoots self in head for no reason or something. It was like, okay, yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
God, that conversation's so intense. It's great. Because you start doing it, and everyone's telling you to back down, and even like you're like freaking out about your own thoughts, telling you to kill yourself. Anyway,
couldn't believe. I was like, oh, the game won't let me do this. I can't wait to see how it doesn't happen. And just the blood splattered everywhere, and the newspaper came up. I was like,
those deaths should stay in the game for sure.
Yeah.
That's
I'll allow that one.
Those deaths are fine because there's like a
I would also say that first heart attack too, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean that could still be another one where you lose something. It's just honestly, the death mechanic needs a serious rethink at least, I reckon.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, like John in the chat is talking about the Dark Souls way of autosaving, and it's so funny because I hated the bonfires in Dark Souls. I think I made that very clear. Like, I hate save stations in Metroid, so I feel really weird having suggested that for this game. But it's a different type of game, I suppose.
Yeah.
Now, something we've talked around, but I guess we should really get into is the story itself.
Um,
Do you want to lead this one, Alexandra, as the expert?
well,
Yeah,
you
as our
have you have
master.
this picture. I don't know if you want to. So, do you want to talk
Oh.
about favorite moments? I think that's what that seems like to me.
Yes, that's what this picture is. This is my
Yeah,
favorite
yeah.
moment from the game.
Okay.
When you and Kim just kind of start nodding at each other for ages. Oh, I loved it so much. There are a lot of great moments like this, but this one was
So
really
many.
my favorite.
There's also the other nodding moment with Garth after the tribunal. And you're all like, "Yep, just a bunch of badasses."
3 badass men. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, like this game is genuinely hilarious. I think we already talked about
yeah.
this, but it's a
Yeah.
very, very funny game.
Um,
And so many memorable characters. Like we shouldn't undersell the character writing itself. Like right from
yeah.
people you love to hate, like Kuno, to people you hate
Well,
to
you
hate,
meet
like
Kuno
Metalhead.
almost immediately, right?
Oh,
Like,
he's
Kuno's
great.
one of the first characters you really meet, and Kuno is an amazing character to really like give you the vibe of this game.
I wish they had kept the same voice actor, but they changed the voice. We already talked about this, but just for those who don't know, the old voice that Kuno has, it wasn't many lines, but it was just so atrociously, like, horrendously grating. It
Yeah.
was so good, and I really wish they kept it for the entire game, but they didn't. But yeah, so if you haven't heard it before, go and
Google it, yeah.
find it on YouTube. It's great.
Yeah,
But
no,
what were your favorite characters? Or actually, Elliot, what was your favorite moment? And then we'll talk about characters, I guess.
a moment that really caught me off guard, I think because it went so against the usual playstyle I'd been doing. I ended up going on that date with Lillian and
I
getting
haven't done that, but
the
you both
sword
did, and I would
from
love to
her.
hear about it.
And that moment completely caught me off guard because I'd just been this useless piece of shit for like 4 days or whatever, and then I just talked to this nice, and like all of a sudden you can start sort of hitting on her, and that was in vibe with my like unhinged sort of thing. And then she just sort of agreed to go on the date, and I was like, oh, okay. And so then we like go to the coast and have this like really nice moment, and I completely changed tactic about halfway through and actually started trying to be a gentleman because I was like, holy shit, like, and then she says she doesn't really want a second date, and like legitimately me, Elliot, was like, fuck, like, I want to say that one just because it stood out to me and caught me so off guard with how much I suddenly became invested in wanting Harry to end up with Lillian. Probably not for Lillian to end up with Harry, or at least my Harry.
No.
But,
no, I couldn't justify trying that check more than once because I was like, I don't actually want to inflict Harry Dubois on this poor woman. Like, God, she deserves so much better. So, I gotta say, so I just have like a whole list, right? Honestly, Humpty Dumpty Dom Center as just like just a tiny moment. It's great.
Yeah.
You have 4 thoughts. Can be like, did he just say? Yes, he did just say. What did he just say? Yeah, it's great. Also, fuck the hat. So good with what's her name? The girl with the disco people. Actually, I love the disco kids so very much.
A seal or something?
A cell, yeah.
Cell.
They're some of my favorites for sure. I love Noid so very, very much, and how he's so articulate about everything. Actually, they all are, but
Egghead
and I got on.
Egghead
like wildfire.
is my favorite
That was my Egghead
of
impression.
all the characters to talk to. The voice is so wonderful, and he says such great, strange things. Oh, like he brings me actual joy. Like it's wonderful.
The first time you talk with him and you have to solve that weird puzzle of like how to get him to continue talking, it's so funny because that's what I think of when I think of conversation trees, is basically like moving through shit to solve a shitty puzzle.
Right.
And I love that Disco Elysium does it once, does it late in the game, and is doing it ironically. Like the game is clearly saying, hey, this is fucking dumb, but so is this guy, so you're gonna have to deal with it. Like, it's great.
It plays out so well with you. He like mirrors you, and I think it's great.
Liz was a character I was interested in, was surprised didn't end up being a factor in the latter half of the game. Like the gardener / lawyer. Who works with the Hardy Boys. Like I pretty much immediately pegged her as very suspicious, and I was like,
Hmm.
I loved her whole vibe of like this, like girl had gone off, gotten the like legal degree, had come back and sort of really become like an extra left wing radical, and like was working with the Hardy Boys and kind of had control over them, and then I didn't see her after the tribunal, and I like that,
Mhm.
like, yeah, she would have been right at the top of my list if she'd actually factored into the end of the game, but unfortunately she
Huh.
disappears.
Yeah, I didn't feel that. I didn't get that same feeling, but I can see what you mean. Yeah. Um, I really loved Cindy the Skull, or sorry,
Mhm.
Cindy the fucking Skull. Definitely, I was like, man, I don't want to say how cool she is in the game. I don't want to have Harry saying that she's doing a great job and how cool she is, even though I really, really do think it, just because she's gonna hate that
I did
old
that,
pop
and
is saying that.
you
But
made the
yeah,
right call. She wasn't
no,
impressed by me being like,
no,
well, you're really
she's so
cool.
cool though. Uh, what's the thing that she writes at the end? I already forgot. Well, it's been
I
like a month, but
it's like the French version of that, like afterlife death thing, I think. Or is it something
mm,
else? What did you guys write on the wall?
oh gosh.
You know, the wall next to the apartments? Like
Oh, I
Bit-
never succeeded
Oh,
that
it's
check.
that whole thing is great. Well, because you then I think you talk to Cindy and you tell her what you're gonna make,
yeah.
and I save scum that because even if you fail it, she still like lets you.
Mm.
But she's still a little bit disappointed in you. But when you succeed, you have a bunch of wild options to tell her, and you go into detail describing how you're gonna like draw an ancient you're going to make a gigantic
It's like a
pictographic
phoenix.
cave painting
Yeah,
of a phoenix,
that's what I did.
of a
Yeah.
dinosaur phoenix. Oh, it's great. But
And
then
then
you
I
can't because you're not an artist. So
yeah, yeah, that was the thing. I actually told her that. Like I did this, and then I went down to do it and like looked at the options, and it was like,
right.
oh, I'm not going to be able to live up to the promise I just made to her. Whereas like when I said I fully intended to make my Harry follow through with this plan that was not going to work, so instead I wrote "fuck the police," which won me points with Kuno. Yeah.
Oh, so the Cindy's graffiti at the end is "Un jour je serai de retour près de toi," which is one day I will return to you.
That's it.
Okay. Oh
So
yes, Miss Evil Doom did say that in the chat. I thought that was their answer to what did they write on the graffiti wall themselves.
that's cool.
I liked lighting the graffiti on fire. That was
Oh
fun.
yeah, that's cool. And then how Kim doesn't get mad at you. I appreciate that.
Didn't have a Kim when I got there. I
You
was
psycho.
I was free of the old ball and chain by that point.
Mhm. Should we? I want to talk about the art style as well and how it ties into the game because I think it's really interesting. Like, it's a perfect art style to represent a character who is coming out of effectively a drunken bender and starting to see the beauty of the world around them. Right? Like,
Mhm.
it's this very like painterly, colorful world, and you're just kind of seeing. Yeah, I feel like I'm seeing through Harry's eyes post hangover what the world looks like, and it just felt like it landed so effectively.
Well, I like how it's streaks of color pushing
Mhm.
through like white and brown palette. Like it's this
Yeah, like gray,
yeah,
industrial
it's a
palettes.
really bleak color palette, but just with little streaks of brightness popping through, which is really just the game in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And like the griminess and the dirtiness of it, like having that portrait of Harry in the corner of your screen, like he hurt
Mm.
me to look at, and
I didn't wipe the mirror for the first 3 days until someone kind of told me to. So
okay, like
uh,
he's on screen now. Like it's just
yeah.
it's a real
Yeah,
full
it's
on
painful.
art style. But again, I feel like it's so you get the vibe of the game pretty immediately because you open and
Right.
it's grays and browns. Everything and everyone is kind of ugly and off looking. And I was
Right.
thinking, like, okay, this isn't going to be like a Nintendo game, right? Like this is going to be like rough.
Yeah.
Also, the music is good. I feel like
Hmm.
we should give a shout out. I quite enjoyed the soundtrack. There's a number of
Yeah.
tracks that sound like they're lifted straight out of the Expanses soundtrack, so that's
Hmm.
always going to be a win for me.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a gorgeous game.
Also,
Um,
just as an aside, while we're talking about the art, I will just shout out and put on in the background visual calculus. Great
right.
skill. Every time visual calculus popped out, you could tell the artists were having fun.
Yeah, this bit where you're kind of reconstructing your car trip, delightful.
hmm
Sorry, Alexander, I cut you off. What were you gonna say?
No, I didn't have anything. No.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, great art style, great music, but like, God, they feel like the decoration on top of just the brilliant writing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Should we talk about? I think it's worth us talking about like the end of the game, because it is such a. I mean, everything kind of comes together, right?
And then I want to talk broadly about the themes afterwards, but we don't have to spend too much time.
Sure.
Sure.
Because there's just so much. So.
Yeah, we could be here for hours if we wanted.
Yeah, I mean, we're already coming up
we
on
should
a 2-hour-long stream.
The Doof cast to cover it. just so we focus on the themes. Yeah. But the ending.
So yeah, I've just really thought the ending to this game was so perfect. Like in so many ways, and I want to talk about a few other ways here. So one, the fact that you find this deserter who is the murderer, I think is great. And I was kind of talking about this as it was unfolding in my stream of like, and I think people in the Game Club Discord channel were talking about like, oh, I'm worried that they won't like the ending because there have been complaints about it, like just being a character that you had never met, or whatever. And I get that, but it's just like
it's so perfect for the game.
It is, because the game is about the political scars in Martinez, right? So the fact that that's effectively who is the culprit, political remnants, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just so brilliant. And to kind of emphasize that, I was asked in Discord by Miss Evil Doom who I thought had committed the crime. And effectively what I said was pretty much along those exact lines. And, there's no real way to predict who the murderer is, but the fact that that's pretty much what it was, it just kind of, I just thought it worked so well.
And it tells you who and what killed the guy right at the beginning. When you first inspect the body, what killed him? Communism. What did him in? Love.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, correct. I think like as well, I can see why people would be disappointed because like depending on how you're engaging with the game, I can see you getting involved in all the
mystery ending.
Well, yeah.
But Disco Elysium is not a mystery. Is the thing. It's not actually a detective novel. You're playing a detective, but it's not at all actually a mystery. I don't think I ever had a moment in the game where I was like, oh, putting together the clues in my own head, or like actually figuring something out and then doing something to solve the problem. I click the dialogue options when they showed up.
I would disagree with that. I think the moment where Ruby revealed to me that Klausja had just played the absolute fuck out of me was one of those for me. Like, I'm getting hit by that pale beam she's shooting at you, and then she sort of starts talking about Klausja, and they're like, because like me, Elliot, totally bought into Klausja's bullshit. And so Ruby starts hitting you with the truth, and I just had this moment where I think I stopped like playing for a second. I was like, fuck, like I'm an idiot. Like, so I definitely had a few moments, and it was mostly in side quests where you'd put some pieces together right before the game would just straight up tell you. But I agree, as you go through the game you start to realize, or at least I just stopped caring about who done it. Like I was way more invested in setting up the church or like whatever.
Yeah. Another ship saying something, and I think they say Ruben Classier are exactly what you expect out of a detective story. That's true. I think like the point of it not actually having like a surprise whodunit though, like putting together all the clues and being like, it was the butler. Yeah. It was the butler moment. I think that is also a point on like how detective work and being a cop actually is. Like I think it's a point that you sort of feel through it that Harry is a good cop because he talks to people, because he's connected to the community and he cares. Not because of necessarily the superstar cop stuff. It's just because he talks to people.
Well, and that's why I think the Phasmid, like this bit, which was so fucking powerful when the Phasmid is there,
Yeah.
it's incredible because it's like you're having this conversation, and the vibe, the thing that this did for me was like I felt like I was in this bleak world that pretty much was real. The only supernatural thing I'd encountered at this point was the 2 millimeter hole in the world, right?
Right.
And then this
that's
fucking
bad.
Did you not meet the guy in the container?
oh yes,
Oh, that's
but
weird too.
that was a hallucination. Like Kim couldn't see that, so that I
that's just
chalked
because
that.
That's just because Kim's bourgeois.
Okay, but like I just chalked that down to me hallucinating, right? But then you get
Okay.
this, and you're just like, this is so fucking surreal, but it is real in this world, and I found it so satisfying. Of like, no, the world, it's a representation of this world that Harry lives in is not just bleak. There's actually some really hopeful, interesting things that are left. Like there is a world that is still here, buried under all the grime.
Yeah.
And I just found that so satisfying.
Well, yeah, like I think that's what it comes down to, is like, because you talk about like, in a classic detective story, it would have to be somebody from the game that you'd met who'd done it for it to feel satisfying. Like,
Right.
have to tie into the overall mystery. But yeah, like as Ruben said, he kind of predicted where it was going, because the game is so bleak, and there's a lot of nihilism involved in the world to a certain degree. So like, yeah, the idea that it was just some random guy who's a holdout from a war and was just horny for a girl, like that totally adds up. But then to mix in the Insulindian Phasma to then also say, but don't worry, like it's not all shit, like is actually just beautiful.
Yeah. But
I just want to put one more thing on this, Alex, which is there's also this moment where you're reading the Dick Mullen novel. I don't know if you all got this, and the book fucking falls apart in your hands, and you don't get to see it.
Really?
And so, you can buy a Dick Mullen novel,
That's
and
cool.
you go through it and you read it, and it's like, oh, it's setting up like all these characters, and then you get to the final chapter, and the pages fall apart, and you never find out who did the murder in this Dick Mullen's novel. And I just thought, thinking back, I think that's such a wonderful way to seed the idea of like, don't get too hung up on who actually did it, because it's more of a complex web. I thought that was great.
I can see why people would not quite get there and then get annoyed when they get out to the ending and it's just like a random, because if they didn't ever quite overcome, like, because I came into this engaging with it as a classic detective story, like I thought Liz had done it, like, and I eventually sort of, enough time playing with the game made me realize that wasn't where it was going. But I could see how somebody maybe wouldn't get there, and then you would be pretty pissed off if you're expecting a narratively satisfying reveal and you get random old horny dude.
Yeah. I also like you have in your notes, Elliot, at the beginning when you first started playing, you wrote, "Was slow at times, but I really got into it. Forced myself." No, wait, that's not the line. It's right after it. Sorry. Something to come back to when I finish. There's so much random bullshit in the world. How much is relevant to the final plot? Does it become relevant because we chase it? And I think the Insulindian Phasma is exactly the perfect answer to that, which is like, yes, so much of it comes back and is relevant.
When I wrote that, I was almost picturing, like, part of the reason I pursued specifically the cryptozoologist stuff was because I was working on a theory that the ending depended on your playthrough, so like your interactions would change who done it. Like that was the theory I was kind of operating on. So I started really chasing the cryptozoologist stuff because I was like, I want Weed's cryptozoology stuff to be in the ending, and that didn't end up being how it worked. But I still got my wish. So like,
so you won. But the thing is, and this is the other part of the ending, is the showdown with your precinct, right? And this is the part to me that really unifies all the other in air quotes, meaningless stuff you've been doing, is like the choices that you make. For me, what it was, Kim would stepped in multiple times and said, no, he's not a piece of shit because he did this thing and he's genuinely been out trying to help people, and all these kind of bits and pieces that tied in all the random stuff that I'd been doing as a like community advocate kind of cop into the defense of me not just being a waste of space. And I just thought it's such a great way for it all to tie together. It doesn't have to be like oh, you've set up the church, and so Suna is there for the final showdown. But it
Mm.
is the way that you've played ties back into the unfolding of this final, conversation.
I think the
Yeah.
game, like it is really nice how the ending is very much like very focused on like the character of Harry and your choices.
Right.
Because there were a number of really cool moments where, like, I don't know about you, Ruben, but I kept getting dinged later in the game because people knew that I talked to Measurehead and internalized his racism to get through the door. And it didn't matter that as soon as I was done with it, I immediately forgot it. Like, Everard and a few other people would just throw in casual little lines about how I was a racist. And I
Mhm.
really liked how it felt like decisions like that would come back to bite me in the ass. And you're right, that really does kind of culminate, at least in your playthrough, with that ending where Kim lists off the good things you've done.
Well, Kuno did that a bit for you as well, I saw, but not to the same extent,
No,
because
and
Kuno's not as coherent.
Yeah, well, and it doesn't carry the same weight with the other precinct people because he's
Mhm.
Also, sorry, just as a quick aside, I like the deserter as a kind of parallel to Harry, just because as you touched on, like a big theme is like this place is tearing itself apart over the memory of the revolution and all that, and obviously Harry is someone who's struggling to let the past go to the point where he's let it wipe his memory. So of course the villain is just some dude who never got over some shit that happened 50 years ago.
Mhm.
Perfect.
Yeah. The unwillingness to accept the current circumstance and move on. I think that's a primary theme here.
Yeah.
Among many that are mostly weaved together, but also sometimes not. Actually, do we want to just move into talking about themes and stuff?
Yes.
Well, yeah, I think that's a really good segue
Okay.
because Nother in chat right now is summarizing some theories that they posted in the Discord around like what the Insulindian phasmid specifically represents and how it kind of is a parallel to communism and stuff like that. And that is what you get when you have a work that has such strong theming, is
Mhm.
it allows you to interpret it in such deep ways.
The stick bug is communism, and it's actually like a valid interpretation. It's great.
Yeah, I
I-
read it on the Discord and I actually really like it. Like,
Yes,
yeah.
me too.
I think
It's
my
good.
brother started writing it as a shit post and then finished it.
But yeah.
Actually, this is good.
Well, hey, that's what being English major is all about. That's what the entire English academic department at every university is. It's just bullshitting until you get meaning out of it, and then you like learn and grow from it.
Every good
ridiculous.
essay starts with a
I-
shit post. I think.
Honestly,
Yeah.
I think like a few of my like best predictions back in Deep Impact started as jokes I was making, and then I'd think
Yeah.
about the joke more and I'd be like,
But
oh,
actually,
Like,
exactly. This, but
so, yeah.
unironically.
Yeah.
I chose the screenshot for talking about themes just because it's one of the choices with the most responses possible. I don't even know if like they all actually have responses from Joyce, but so this is when you get the lowdown about the Pale. So she describes the Pale. I know, Ruben, I don't think you saw this, but it's
That's
this
wild to me. Like, how did you understand how the world worked without knowing about the Pale?
Didn't need to know about it. I just thought
I
it was
guess.
basically our world.
I picked up enough of it just from like the hole in the world and some other stuff. And that book about the medicine book about the Pale and some other stuff. But
See, I didn't actually read that one. I only got the lowdown from Joyce.
It-
Like a few other clues, but like, yeah.
it probably reads a lot better when you go back with context, which I haven't done yet. I just remember it telling you to go and take a walk in the Pale, which seems like a bad idea. But yeah, so this is, you get the lowdown about the Pale, and it's this place that is like there's 2 times as much Pale as there is reality, and it's the unreality in between like the segments of reality of the Insulind, of the Isolas, and it basically, the main theme that comes from there is how like it's encroaching, it's expanding, and it's going to, when you go in there, you forget what you are and you just get lost in the past, right? You get lost in just everything at once, right? And so it's like this, it's a lot of things. It's like just, it's death, it's just the encroaching of history, and what I like about this particular option is that like so it has all those political responses there, but it's really clear, and this is something that's clear almost all the time with political responses that actually no, that's a ridiculous response. Um, the advance of the pale, consuming reality cannot be stopped with immediate, total, ruthless communism or a powerful and uh, anti-communist force, maybe too powerful. Like, no, they're not, and you know it's not. But it's like politics sort of fall apart in the face of something like death. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also like there was a lot of stuff where it almost felt like like the Pale was built up of all the thoughts and memories of
Mm-hmm.
history. Like there was I think she was just called the Pale Driver, and it was like she had all these memories of like lives that weren't hers because
Mm-hmm.
of too much exposure to the Pale, which is like infected
Right.
her with new memories and stuff. And
Yeah.
that idea that like the world is slowly being buried in the past is obviously very appropriate
Yeah.
to Disco Elysium. It's just it's wild because it's such a crazy part of the world building that is
Mm-hmm.
very hidden, and you can completely not engage with it. And it's wild because it turns it from like this weird like game set in the 50s or whatever to um like full on like sci-fi.
Yeah. Um, yeah, yeah. So I did the fascist playthrough this last my second run, which it is relevant. One of the things that you do, you talk to Measurehead, you talk to all the racists, and you get their perspective on the racism, and they're all very different, but they're all united in just like hating well other races and also women and also just like the president in general. And the way that you approach them is you ask if you can time travel. You ask each of them, can you go back in time? And they all answer in different ways of how serious they are. But anyway, Measurehead talks specifically about the Pale Driver, about the old woman, and he talks about it as if it's like some terrible, stupid thing to want to turn back. Um, and it's interesting. Like Measurehead out of all the races is sort of like the most put together and almost like honorable about it, which is I don't want to compliment the racism, but also like he does basically tell Dubois to just like, hey, like grow up, like um don't you can't be stuck in the past. You just have to live with whatever the present circumstances are. He says he's like a non-traditional traditionalist, which is interesting. But anyway,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
I get what you mean. Yeah, I don't know. It's I guess as somebody who's a bit of like a world building addict, and I love mechanics like that.
Mhm.
While I get that having the Pale as such a backseat thing for Disco Elysium is actually a great idea and it works.
Mhm.
Once I'd finished the game, I was sitting here and I was like, okay, but can we get a sequel like about like I want to see all the stuff like where the hole in the world's going, like where the
Mhm.
Pale like uh, I hope there are more things in this world that explore that, because as much as I
Mhm.
agree with the decision to leave it in the background of this, I was just like, oh my god, like please more.
Yeah. Did you want to talk about the politics?
Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's hard. We've only done the one playthrough. Like, I guess I'm fairly left leaning, and
Mm.
so was my Harry. So I wasn't playing up the politics too much. I was mostly going along the lines of my own stuff
Mhm.
90% of the time.
Did either of you take moralism?
Not
No,
really.
Okay,
I had a massive confusion around taking it
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah,
sorts.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
didn't.
I think that's the most poignant to me. But I do want to talk about all of them. For the fascism one, I talked about this right before we started streaming to Elliot, but so they all have mechanical implications, right? I think the moralism one is when you take moralism options, you get healed for it. Communism, you get 4 XP per left wing dialogue choice. The ultra liberal, you get 1 real every time you take one. And then the fascism one is really interesting because it actually hurts you to say the nationalist options. And I think it's presented as if like you are being in pain because you're basically a loser, right? Because you're just like, things suck so much now, and I just want things to go back. That's basically like your whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because when you have the fascist thought, it shows up in almost every single conversation as a dialogue choice, but you never click it because you're disincentivized twice over, right? People are going to be disappointed in you, and it literally hurts. So it's this interesting effect of making you know that your character, that Harry's thinking about it and never saying it, and sort of like, and you know that sort of still affects what his actions, because you are pursuing this fascist quest line, even if you aren't saying the outright fascist things, which is interesting.
I quite like that take of like focusing not on the fascist that's like, yeah, running around spouting hate speech everywhere, but about the one, yeah, who just thinks it or says something that just walks the line,
Mm-hmm.
like, because that's the much more insidious form of it.
Yeah.
So I kind of like the idea of the game leaning into that aspect and really highlighting like what that side of fascism is.
Yeah, I would recommend actually doing the fascist thing, because in the game, I mean, because you talk to each of them and they really do have some interesting and poignant things to say, because it's basically, I think the main point is that like these are really damaged people and they're latching onto something that they think will help but doesn't.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really it's well done, and I think that's one of the main points about all of them, is that, and it shows up like in this dialogue right here, that Harry, he's just choosing to be political, even if he might actually be left leaning or whatever, but the real reason that he's saying the ridiculous stuff of like, you know, uh, total ruthless communism and we have to make the streets run red with the blood of the bourgeoisie, right? Is actually just because he's hurt, and that he was hurt by a middle class woman who he thinks probably ran off to be with a rich guy. And yeah, so if you're a fascist, like it boils down to, in the game, to hating women. In the communist one is like you just hate her for being wealthy. Ultra liberal is like this sort of really pathetic. It comes across how pathetic it is in all the dialogue options of like, yeah, just hustle and you'll win, right? Just sort of trying to take back control, but it's just every dialogue option is just pathetic with it. Moralism, I'm not entirely sure where it comes into with Harry's past as the other three do, but I love the critique with it. When you internalize the moralist thought, it's like it's presented as, oh yes, it's just like, you know, progress. We just want, do you like chaos and bloodshed? No, we want stability, right? And except the whole point with it is like it will never be slow enough progress. The ideas of moralism don't actually exist. It's just the status quo but slightly better. That's it.
Yeah.
There's no moralist utopia, because it doesn't. Right, to be a utopia, it has to be in one of the other political choices. There's no actual ideas to moralism or centrism.
Yeah, like I guess Nother's touching on the point that like Harry's moralism is different to Kim's moralism, which is different to the moral intern's moralism. Yeah, I like that it's like it's not so much a like standard belief system as it is this belief that it's like, oh, things are mostly fine, we just need to change a little bit, and but then everyone will probably have a different idea of what needs changing.
The moralism of Kim,
like they're not aiming for anything specific.
Yeah. I mean, moralism, like Kim's a cop, so just kind of inherently, you're gonna be kind of okay with some of the bad stuff that's involved. I mean, his partner does speed right in front of him and doesn't do anything because he can't. He just accepts it. So yeah.
There's one more big important question that we have to ask if we're finished discussing the politics stuff.
Mhm.
And that question is, Elliot, why did you hate Kim so much? I don't understand it. Kim is the best character in this goddamn game, but every time you, I just don't understand.
I mean, I don't know if hate feels like a strong word for how I feel about Kim. Like consistently disappointed, like held back by are much more accurate verbs to describe my relationship with. Yeah, no, it mostly started as a joke because like I was going for that very like wild lad superstar cop at the start, and Kim was constantly trying to pull me back to reality. And then there were a few tangible moments where he stopped me from doing something stupid. And so it just sort of became a meme in my run that Kim was my enemy, and like
Wait, and you didn't want him to stop you from doing something stupid? Is
No.
that right?
no,
Okay.
that was the thing. So it just yeah, it sort of became this thing that like I was constantly trying to do crazy shit, and Kim was trying to like keep it in. And so like as the run went on, he just became more and more of my enemy, which like made it so bizarre that when that point in the tribunal comes up to try and save him, I got all the bonuses for Kim trusting me. It was like Kim truly trusts you, like +3, and I was like, I'd love to learn how
Why?
that works because
Mm.
I gave that the only reason Kim should trust me is because I had been nothing but brutally honest with him. Like I would openly do things like take speed in front of him and force him to awkwardly look away. Like I had made his life miserable, so I don't understand why he trusted me.
I mean, trust your instincts.
Like he
Um,
hated it when I gave. So I took the drugs from Kuno's dad, and then I gave the half to Kuno like we agreed because I'm a man of my word. And Kim
You
didn't like
monster.
it.
Yeah, because he gave drugs to a child, you psychopath.
Well, but they were his drugs.
Well, yeah.
How does that make that better, Elliot?
I wanted to use this as a way to talk about Kim because
Yeah.
I think Kim's great. Narratively, I really love Kim. Like Kim is in the game to effectively inspire you and kind of gently rebuke you when you do things that are too shitty, so that it kind of keeps you more or less on the track of being not a total shitbag. But like mechanically, I had built such a camaraderie with Kim
Yeah.
because not only narratively but mechanically, there are a few times where I would fail a roll, and one of the options in the failure was like, Kim, can you have a crack at this or something?
Yeah.
And Kim would just come in and totally save my ass. It was so I felt like I built a camaraderie with Kim, and it had led to mechanically Kim saving my ass on a few things,
Yeah.
and I just thought that was so great.
Because like narratively, like if you're doing the video game trope as old as time of you have amnesia, you need the
Yeah.
NPC companion who's gonna like fill in the world building when needed, and like
Yeah,
Kim
of
does a
course.
good job of that.
Yeah.
But you're right, like just gameplay wise, like him, the way he riffs off other characters as well as you, like he really is a third presence. He grows on you, and then like your relationship with him affects all those other conversations. Like he's more than just an NPC who's on the sidelines. Like
Mhm.
he's almost one of the core things where like the game is tracking all these things as it progresses, and some things might come up a bit later, but like only in certain contexts. Kim's like the constant where the game can judge you for every decision you've made as it's going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Which I really like. I just quick, I want to bring up Miss Evil Doom is saying that the things that make Kim trust you are like if you're competent as a cop and if you're not racist, and like I was neither of those things. So I guess despite the fact that I would do drugs in front of him and go out of my way to frustrate him in other ways, the fact that I wasn't racist and that I got results meant that he trusted
Hey,
me.
maybe he saw into your heart, Elliot.
Yeah.
And
That
even
would've
though
made it
you're
worse.
addicted to speed,
Even
and
though
you
you're
had,
addicted to speed and you let him get shot, he
it
trusts
doesn't
you.
mean you're a bad person.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't nice to him. Which is the new
Ugh.
reason that's being given. Yeah,
I just can't wait for the scene, 2 years in the future of your playthrough, Elliot, where Kim finds out that there's a 12-year-old junior detective at the 41st named Kuno.
Yeah. Oh,
and I just can't wait to find out Kim's reaction.
if there's like a Disco Elysium 2, or what, like any sort of sequel, and it does that thing that some games will do where it uses your past save to like put some seeds for the second one. I'd love to see what mine would do compared to most people's, because like
Oh yeah.
I had a very different relationship with Kim than most people, I think. And yeah, like Kuno. So I got the Kuno ending, which for my playthrough was just poetically perfect. And we ended up recruiting Kuno at the end as a junior officer. And he swore good, like he was off speed. Yeah, that was great.
Miss Evil Doom, I think, describes how actually the trust thing works with Kim. That it's the good cop, bad cop points.
I didn't understand those.
I didn't either, but she says it's basically Kim likes you points. So, for example, she says if you tell your old partner that Kim is cooler than him, you get good cop points. Also, if you make jokes during the autopsy, which is
I did that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you probably could quantify the bond that you have through the dialogue options that you choose. And then you just make that into a stat, and you're like, yeah, you did bond over this thing. And I think, Elliot, it probably does work like 90% of the time for most people. So
yeah, I was very much leading into the fact that I could tell everybody else liked Kim, and he'd been disrupting my very specific play style, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go all in on hating Kim.
That's why I mentioned earlier, before the stream, that you are very much like Kim. There's that conversation where he talks about the pissing contest between the two precincts, and he's like, yes, I am what's the word he uses, but he loves being a spoil sport, basically. Yeah. It's just like, well, hating on Kim is that, so.
that's fair oh yeah, what a game.
What a game.
What a great game.
So we'll jump into the Q&A section here. I guess anybody has any topics they want to bring? It doesn't have to be questions, actually. If there's just like something you want to say, chuck it in the chat. We'll read it out.
I think there might have been one earlier.
We've had a lot of, obviously, chat interaction during this game, because it's a game that'll... I mean, that's the mark of a good game, right? People want to talk about it.
Especially, this is one of those ones, there are a lot of games, especially in the last, 10 years, where, the focus has shifted to very much replayability through very individualized stories. So many games now where you kind of create your own version of the narrative through your choices. And it's never been as big as this, but it's also, I don't find talking about those games as fun. I usually much prefer connecting to people over shared narrative points. I'm much less interested in sitting down next to someone at the end of a game and being like, oh, you did that differently? I much rather talk about the same moment. So it's interesting to me that this game was the opposite. I loved finding out that Ruben had Kim at the end of the game, and because I thought Kuno being at the end of the game was the normal thing. So finding out stuff like that, it was because I cared about the characters. Where if it's something like Skyrim, it's like, it played out differently for me because I shot arrows instead of using daggers or whatever.
Right.
I don't care. Okay, so it looks like we're starting to get some questions and stuff. Pull out the first one from Miss Evil Doom. Is Disco Elysium a hopeful game?
That is I think yes to that, right? It's a grim game while you're playing it, but the end. I mean, I guess it depends on the choices you make, but the ending that I got was Harry effectively resolving to move on from his pretty rough past. And maybe that doesn't last 100%, and maybe he's done that a few times, but it felt optimistic to me.
I think it's about the hope that you can have in this world. This is a bad world. The world is literally going to end sooner than later.
Yeah. The world is dying.
And it's all going to eventually dissolve into nothingness and confusion and just a reality that sucks, basically. And the revolution is dead, and it has basically no hope of returning. And if you still think that it's going to return, you're kind of ridiculous. And that was the only hope for making the world really a better place. And moralism is really just... You talk to that bureaucrat, right? And it's just like... So there is not going to be anything we might have democracy in 50 years, maybe.
Yeah.
Like,
But
but
like, you know,
yeah.
there's moments like when you're on the island and
Mhm.
you note that the initials for the ICM and the RCM are very similar. And Kim doesn't
Mhm.
put a big deal on it, but to me that's an indicator of like, okay, yes, the names have changed, but the concepts that people are
Mm.
embodying are still the same, you know?
Right.
Well, yeah.
I
Well,
don't know.
and that's why I think my read would lean much closer to Alexandra's, where it's like, I guess I would argue that Disco Elysium is sort of saying, it all kind of is a bit hopeless. Like, it's all going to be bad at the end, but you shouldn't let that stop you from finding the lights in your life. And like,
And caring about people. Yeah.
I'd point to the church as a great example of this. Like, the
Mhm.
fact that they, or at least in the version I had of the church, you managed to get the speakers to play the sound of like the end of the universe from this
Mhm.
gap in space, and you turn it into a bass track for like some
Yeah.
sick
Yeah.
beats that you can dance to. I've had, to me, that sums up Disco Elysium, where it's like, yeah, the universe is going to end, but we can fucking party until it does. Like,
Honestly, I think that the answer to the hopelessness of the universe, the answer that Disco Elysium gives, is to be hardcore. So
well, yeah, it's
I,
you got to be disco.
I kind of really do mean
Yeah,
that, like
yeah,
genuinely.
no,
Like I
same.
think, yeah.
I would add the point that you brought up about it's about caring about other people too. Um, but yeah, I would argue the game basically says, well, there isn't really any hope, but that, don't let that get you down, I guess.
Mhm.
Our next question is from John. Like, I guess it's mostly targeted at me and Ruben, but I'd love to hear your answer to Alexandra, which is, do you think you'll be interested in playing more CRPGs now that you played this one? Because it was my first. I think it might have been Ruben's first.
Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to think of. I've put up a list of top 10 CRPGs.
Yeah, could you just list some because
I haven't played any of them. So,
I'm not
Dragon
aware of
Age
like
Origins, Pillars of
okay.
Eternity, Divinity Original Sin, Tyranny, Pillars of Eternity 2, Pathfinder Kingmaker, Disco Elysium, Wasteland 3, Pathfinder again. Yeah, so I none of these make sense to me.
I started playing
Dragon Age
Pillars of
is the only one I've
Eternity.
heard of.
I totally bounced off the combat systems. That's why I haven't done that. But I'm more leaning to trying it again because of this. Yeah, for sure.
What about you, Ruben? Is this a genre that has more interest for you now than it did at the start?
Maybe. I mean, it sounds like Disco Elysium is kind of defined by what it does differently to other CRPGs, so that doesn't bode well. But I mean, I'm willing to try them.
Yeah, I kind of get the vibe that this would be for me the pinnacle of the genre. So in a way, it's kind of made me less inclined to try the genre because I feel like
Yeah, totally.
now I've done the good
downhill
one.
from here.
Well, yeah, why would I go to the others?
There are in betweens. Did y'all ever play any of the BioWare like Mass Effect, Dragon Age games?
No.
Okay, well those I mean like the RPGs can be fusions of many genres, right? Like this was just like kind of pure 100% nothing but RPG.
Yeah.
But like Pillars of Eternity and the others are like squad based fighters. I don't know what the proper term is, like Diablo, but
I have gotten more into action RPGs is really the only sort of RPG.
Mass Effect would be that,
yeah. Mass Effect is the sort of like RPG I would play normally. Like, obviously I haven't played it, so not that normally, but it's like if I'm going to play a RPG, it's going to be like an action one.
I would recommend it. I think there's like a bundle or remake of it happening right now or something where they're gonna do all 3 games together or something. I'm not entirely aware, but Disco Elysium really does this way better than it ever did. But it's still like some of the joys of making those choices and stuff are in there. Yeah. And making those bonds with those characters, especially, I think that's what some of those games do the best.
Question from Mistfist: will you play this game again?
I'm already on my second run, so yes.
Sorry, you go.
I did it as like optimal as possible by getting art cop immediately, and so I'm like way really really high level for where I'm at. And then I considered also just cheating a run and just like giving myself max stats and just seeing what happens. But honestly, like I think it might be more fun just to go with 1 in all stats or something. Like
Yeah, load, like,
you
right
get a
up
lot less of the passives and stuff, but also you get more of the interesting failures. So
Interesting thoughts.
my answer to would I play this game again is, like, in theory, like, I think that is a good idea and I'd like to do it. Like, realistically, I won't find the time, or I won't make the time. So it's like, yeah, like in theory, I am willing to play this game again. I think it would be fun to do a very different playthrough and experience a very different side to it. I don't think I don't think I will end up doing that though.
I would be worried that if I did that though, I would just fall back into my habits of playing myself. So almost I'd rather just like watch people do Twitch streams of it or something, where I can kind of be like, they're playing it as them, and I'd be curious to see what it looks like when they do it. You know,
this is a strange, or a unlikely is not the right word term, but like it would never happen. But I wish there was like a scene select or something, so I could just go skip to any particular conversation, maybe like pick some like background things that could have happened, and just see what so many of the dialogue options do, right? Because the only way you could actually experience that is if you like do different runs with different stats and then like quick save and do them again and again. Because even if you watch someone, you're not going to like see all of the other choices that they could have taken. Yeah.
Some sort of like exploratory mode, like a hacker beta sort of mode where you can do whatever you want. Yeah.
Right. It's just some wild things that can happen. Apparently, there's one where you find out a bunch of stuff about the hole in the world, and then you do like a weird call or use a radio or something, and then the moral intern comes and basically abducts you, and it's like a death screen because they like you get taken up into an airship.
That's crazy.
What?
Yeah. So I have no idea how to make it happen, but that is something that can happen. So
next question comes from Prof, which is that there's a bunch of other games, like we've brought up Telltale before, and they do this where after you've made a choice, you'll get a thing about what percentage of players also made that choice, and Prof's basically asking, do you think that would have been a good addition to this game?
I think that leans into the idea of wanting to see what choices other people make. So yeah,
I would like it.
Yeah.
I'd see it as being something at the end though. Like I would put it like
totally.
after the credits, and obviously what that means is, like there's sort of a billion choices in this game, so you'd probably have to handpick like a dozen.
Yeah, like you saved Kim's life. 40% of people did that. You did blah. 30% of people did that.
The Kim's life one is tricky because that's mostly in the hands of the role.
Yeah, true.
But like the sort of stats, like how many people internalized communism or something, I think would be fun.
Yeah. Your political ideology spread versus majority of players or something.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see.
Tied into local political data to do like based on the choices you've made in this game, your local representative, you would mostly align with the policies of.
So it's like that ABC.
It's like a vote compass.
Yeah, the ABC vote compass, but for from Disco Elysium.
It'd be interesting because like it's really, especially like the first choices that you make along those political lines, that would be the most telling, because those are the ones that like usually like reasonable, because obviously as you go, and in the beginning too, but the more there's a ton of ridiculous options, right?
Yeah.
But like there's a lot of little things that are coded in a certain way that aren't necessarily super explicitly left-wing or nationalist or whatever, but like they do contribute, and if you're looking for it, you understand it. So those would be the ones that I think would be most telling, not necessarily the ones where it's just straight up video game racism, which is totally meaningless to you because you don't know what a zeolite is. So
All right. Well, I think that's all the questions.
Yeah, I'm trying to catch up on the chat to see, but yeah, I think so. Cool.
All right. Well, shall we reveal next month?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
The winner of this month's vote was Doom 2016. Because
The
I think there's
original
a very
Doom.
old one.
The original Doom.
Gets put on all the things.
Speaking of the original Doom, I know I'm already distracting from the actual game that you're doing. But it's wild how it was literally everywhere. My cousins are from Uruguay, which is a fairly poor-ish country. But all the students at my cousin's school got these little the student laptops that really can't do much except for maybe write a text document and a calculator and some other things. But they all could have Doom on them.
Yeah.
And so he would play Doom on this tiny maybe I don't know what a really low resolution is, but extremely low resolution, playing with the arrows, and yeah, it was just really, really interesting to see that classic game on basically whatever it can be on,
Yeah, it's actually like a joke in
It's a
electrical
meme,
engineering and computer science. So it's like something isn't real unless you can run Doom on it.
Yeah, I've
people
seen
have got
memes
Doom
of,
on washing machines and shit.
a pregnancy test.
Wild.
Yeah.
I want to put it on my fridge.
Yeah.
Smart
Which
fridges,
because I mean, despite knowing that it's a meme because of that, I've never played a Doom game. This will be my first Bethesda game, technically. So yeah, I'm keen to try this out. I've heard very good things. Like all the YouTubers and stuff who I follow their game reviews because they mostly align with my tastes. All say Doom is the best shooter. Oh, the 2016 one is the best shooter.
The speed runs of Doom are gorgeous. They're gorgeous. They're the kind of speedrun where you really love watching because it just feels so smooth and professional and talented and stuff. It's very cool.
Yeah. So
right.
just another shout out to the Discord. People will be streaming.
We'll be doing
Doom in there.
streams. Yeah.
Yep. And obviously talking about the game as we go through. So come join us if you haven't. I'm gonna jump back to that.
Someone on Discord is bound to be extremely talented at Doom, and then we get to see them speedrun it.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah.
I'm trying to get back to the Discord link. There it is.
Mm-hmm.
Discord.
And there's lots of other stuff on there. I've started reminding people to do the right thing, which is the Writing Prompt podcast that me and Jarvis do. And so I've started sending out reminders for that. I did forget to do it yesterday, so I have to do that after this. But it's a really good way to get yourself to write. So that's what I'm in charge of. So
yeah,
that's my tiny little plug.
Making your own Disco Elysium game one day. A good way to start just by writing more
stuff.
Well,
actually, you could talk about that if you want to talk about making a video game. We have some game developers on there, so including y'all. So, there's it's a good place to talk about those kind of things.
Yeah, definitely.
And then on that note, thanks for joining us this month. It was nice having the perspective of somebody who actually knows what this genre is all about.
It was it's delightful. So, it was I mentioned it at the beginning, but I probably could have mentioned it even more of just how much this is exactly my bag. This is exactly the kind of humor that I like, the kind of writing, the kind of everything that I like. So, I was basically had my jaw drop the first time I played it. I've also made people play the very first hour just to get their reaction. I've made maybe 6 people play for me, and each time it's been interesting. My dad, he's never played really video games. He was the first time that I saw that you can threaten to arrest Gart to make him not to make it so you don't owe him any money. You can threaten him with an arrest, and I didn't know you could do that until my dad, who never ever picks any, who's very abhors violence and all that, and did that crazy option. It was just a lot of fun. So
I mean, obviously, I back the idea that you let loose that sort of stuff in video games. Like you don't have to be constrained by real world
Yeah.
morals as much in video games.
Yeah, but you're not my father, so it's a bit different.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I need to get my
Alright,
mom to
folks.
play it.
Yeah, I would unreservedly recommend this game to everyone,
Mhm.
except for, I guess that recommendation comes with a look out for all the trigger warnings. Like,
Mm.
if there's any topic that would get you to not play a game if it's even mentioned, you probably don't want to play Disco Elysium.
Well, I think you can just you should probably get someone to tell you how to avoid those things.
Yeah,
I think almost everything you can avoid.
That's fair.
Mm.
But well, yeah,
Almost
I don't know. If you're not looking for a game that's going to get intense about some stuff, regardless of what you do, you know, run away screaming, I guess. But yeah, I'd recommend people play it. It's very good.
All right.
Yeah, cool. So I guess yeah, on that note, we'll see you all in a month to talk about Doom.
See you, folks.
All right. Bye.